We're really happy to see you here. We know this is a very important discussion, and I want to read parts of a letter that a gentleman named John Wilson wrote to Dr. Bangser and to the board. And he is asking, basically, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Oh, you are right. Thank you. All right. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So, do we have an approval of the agenda? A motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And none opposed. All right. So, our discussion tonight focuses on the issues concerning the elementary schools and their configuration, as you probably know, because that's why you're here. And Mr. Wilson asks us why we are doing this, because the 7-Eleven committee made its recommendation not to close any schools. Well, they were appointed by us, and that 7-Eleven committee, by law, we had to have a 7-Eleven committee look at the issue of the schools and examine everything that they could examine. And we are not allowed to talk about those things unless we have a public meeting. We have to, because we are elected, we have to make the decisions about what we feel is the best way to educate our students, the best way to provide adequate and good salaries for our employees. We have to think about all of the resources that we have, and we can only do this in a public forum. The Brown Act, which is the California Open Meetings Act, specifies this very carefully, that we cannot have a discussion except in the public. So here we are, and trust me, I don't think any of us really want to close a school ever. I never went to a neighborhood school because I lived on a military base when I was a child, so there were no neighborhood schools. So I don't really have a thought one way or the other, which is, but I know a lot of you belong to neighborhood schools, and a lot of the members of the board also went to neighborhood schools. So I know that this is a very important issue, and the finances of the district, what is best for the educational experience of our students, is paramount in our minds, and that's what we really are hoping, that we can make a decision that will improve, make our school district the absolute best small school district in Ventura County, because we are the smallest school district. Unified, remember, we're a unified district, so some of the other districts are smaller because they are only elementary or only secondary. So with that said, we are going to begin, and we have a lot of public comments. Do you want to speak first? I think I'm going to say here, I'm just going to read the last paragraph. In a letter to the school board that I wrote earlier this year, this is from Mr. John Wilson, I emphasized how the suggested closure of Miners Oak School is extremely problematic and undesirable. I will not repeat the most troublesome reasons in this letter. The closure of any school is undesirable. There are many alternatives to any closures. I hope the board considers alternatives and invites people to submit proposals long before closures become the one item in bold on your agenda. He's unable to attend the meeting tonight, so I wanted to make sure that he knew, hopefully he's watching at some point, that he knew that we heard his appeal, and that we want to consider everything, and we will consider every avenue. And no one is saying that any school is the one that's going to be closed, or anyhow. Okay, so would you like to speak, or should I do public comments? I have 3. Okay, first one, Amy Mendoza.
Thank you, Dr. Bangser. Members of the school board, Andy and Kathy, thank you for having us. We were asked, the Miners Oaks School faculty was asked last year by Dr. Bangser to write a letter and submit it to the board, and we have written a letter, and I'm going to submit it to you. I'm only going to read the opening and closing paragraph just to save time, and I have a copy for every one of you. We, the teachers of Miners Oaks School, are so disappointed that the board is once again considering a school closure or consolidation, even after the 7-Eleven committee recommended that all schools remain open. And there are a lot of paragraphs explaining, and the conclusion is, Miners Oak School is deeply embedded and intertwined in the community. We work closely with local businesses and collaborate with Nordhoff High School students for activities and mentoring. An effective and customized EL program has been developed by staff, and the school is in the finishing stages of transforming into a resilient school with a science and environmental focus. Voters supported us with a yes vote for school improvements across the entire district. Don't alienate our families, uproot our students, lose voter confidence, and split our communities. Let's work together to showcase our schools, not close them. And there's more information in here, and I would like to give a copy. Should I hand them to you? Okay, thank you.
May I just make one comment that ties into that letter and that letter? I want to explain that the 7-Eleven committee made a recommendation to us not to close schools, and we're here to discuss it. So they don't make the decision, they make a recommendation. So that's why we're here. I think there's some confusion. Why are they still discussing it? The 7-Eleven committee already said no. So the committee, it's almost like on a college campus, you have a student government, and they make a recommendation to the college, and then the college has to discuss it. So that's what the 7-Eleven committee was for, and now we discuss their recommendations and all the materials that they asked for. So that's why we're doing this.
And it was late in the year last year, so you postponed it to do in the fall. Is that clear? I mean, is that why? Instead of, because they did recommend it at the end of last year.
Yes.
So instead of,
when they originally began in October, I think we believed they would reach an answer by March, but they didn't until mid-April, so then we didn't get a chance to even hear from them until early May, and we just felt that we needed more time. There's so much that we do in May and June in terms of curriculum for the next year.
We understand.
And the budget for the next year. We said, let's
we
table
understand,
it
yes.
until
Okay. Okay, so we just, thank you.
Annika Forrester.
I thought I was going to have more time to listen to everybody else talk to you guys and pick and choose my comments. The two key things, I guess there's three key things. The first question is, where's the conversation about getting out of the district office downtown? To me, that was the other piece that I heard the 7-Eleven committee on 2 occasions direct the board to investigate, and I'm still feeling really stumped as to why that's not the major focus of your work. Nonetheless, so I would add that to those 18 questions. Where are we at on that? I also came across this really beautiful map that you might have seen on your Facebook feed if you're like me, and it's called 1.1 Person, and it is produced by the University of Virginia, Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service, and you can zoom right down to the Ojai Valley. You can look at the entire United States, and it's a racial map, so you get different colors for each person. But when we talk about neighborhood schools, I hear that phrase dropped. We bandy it about, and I'm not really sure if we've defined what a neighborhood school is. But this map tells me where the neighborhoods are in our community, and I've kind of given up thinking that you're not going to close a school. But I want to say that the school you cannot close is Miners Oaks, because it's in the most densely populated part of our valley. There's another, what I would call neighborhood school, and that's Topa Topa, right smack in the middle of a neighborhood. But I don't see any of the other schools as fitting that definition of being really embedded in a neighborhood where lots and lots of people, including children, live. So that's, I wanted to share this map with you. My color printer doesn't print very well, but you guys can pass it down. You can look it up online. And then the last item, I wanted to refer you back to your Dolinko report that I'm sure you pored over. Well, the 7-Eleven committee pored over it. And again, back to projected growth. Regardless of your confidence in your consultant's capacity to forecast growth, the only school, the school that has head and shoulders more growth projected in 10 years, as opposed to, say, negative growth, which some schools will have, is Miners Oaks. Again, it's almost 10% growth over 10 years, which is probably 50% or more growth than any other elementary school. So again, do what you want and what you see fit. I don't dispute that we need to spend our money wisely, but I don't think Miners Oaks is the school that should be closed for those reasons. And I'll give you this map if you want to look at it. Thank you.
Linda Jordan.
I'm wearing my tall shoes, but I'm still not tall enough. I am here to simply thank you. I know this is a very difficult decision, whatever decision you come to, but I want to say publicly and on record that I've worked closely with some of you, and I know and respect all of you. I can't think of a better group to make this decision. So I wanted to just encourage everyone here that no one is making this decision easily or lightly, and you know, as a member of the 7-Eleven committee, you guys have all the information you need to make a great decision, and I just personally want to thank you for that. Thank you.
Susie Taylor.
I don't even know if I need that. Good evening, Susie Taylor, 829 Camille Court, and Miners Oaks PTA Vice President. And as Linda said, thank you for serving our community. I know it's a great amount of time that you all have put into all of our schools, and all of your efforts are very much appreciated. And what a journey this has been for me, excuse me, these last few months. Identifying areas that need attention, but specifically identifying a parent's right to choose what school they put their children in. Remembering that, excuse me, I have the back to school cold. Remembering that this does not dismiss the school district's responsibility to identify and support remedies for voluntary retention at our schools. The imbalance at our schools didn't seem too important to me until we began discussing school closures. I have observed little to nothing until that point that had been done to address and mitigate the transfer policy and the unintended consequences that resulted. I think as a local government institution, you have the authority to devise and implement remedies to address the issues of segregation. Even within our small valley, it is needed. In reference to Missouri versus Jenkins, they specify that magnet schools have the advantage of encouraging voluntary movement of students in patterns that aids in desegregation. Please review that case law. Please understand the district's responsibility before making your decision to close a school. I spoke before regarding an aggressive marketing plan, and while I don't expect the district to support one school over another, I believe identifying issues and jointly addressing resolutions with school administrators, parents, and the community is appropriate. We have a draft brochure that I'll be happy to provide. It's very rough draft, but it's something that myself, the teachers, the PTA president at Miners Oaks have all collaborated on just to show our small attempts at putting out into the community what we are and who we do at Miners Oaks. I feel it doesn't serve our students or our environment to bus neighborhood children across town, and Miners Oaks offers safe passage for its students to walk and ride their bikes to school, which many of our other elementary locations do not. Please place some value on voluntary retention and allow Miners Oaks to operate as it was intended. By location alone, it was designed to serve the most densely populated area of this entire valley. When considering school consolidation, this is not the location to eliminate, this is the location to build up. I encourage you to put value into what the 7-Eleven committee recommended and provide and provided you, and remember that their recommendation was based on what the community as a whole demonstrated they were willing to tolerate. Even though not everything can be quantified, there is no significant cost savings that will result in a closure. Miners Oaks Elementary School is truly one of 2 neighborhood schools. If your resources for school challenges is closing schools, then you're not figuring out strategies and building on what succeeds. Thank you.
I have to really focus on walking sometimes, so hi, good to see you guys again. This is going to be a very odd comment, but, well, you know me. I was very impressed with the last board meeting because I think you're asking all the right questions. When you try to balance a budget, which is what this is really about going forward, 2, 3, 5 years, you could take a look at your revenues and you can take a look at your expenses, or the money you bring in, the money you shell out. And my son is in 5th grade at Topa this year, and there was actually a person new to the district this year. Couldn't believe it. Nobody moves to Ojai, do they? Well, what I would suggest is that there are people that move here that enroll in our public schools. And if we have new students, I would encourage you to take a look at providing a survey to those new members of our district to see what drove them here. Maybe we can learn some lessons from that. That's certainly one way to improve the revenue side of things at $7,000 a pop or whatever it is. My next comments are really not directed towards the board because I think you've done a wonderful job. But I'm becoming old and a bit senile, and I've decided that I'm going to follow the Rolling Stones lyrics and believe that you can't always get what you want, but if you try, you get what you need. In the last board meeting, I listened to the chairman of to the president of the Teachers Association talking about what about us. And when I go to our schools, I don't see any tag or gate programs. I see ESL resources integrated onto the teacher. And our teachers do not receive fair compensation in this market. And I look at budget projections that talk about us being down $100,000 or whatever it is in a year. That's real money, okay? And so as far as what we want, we'd like to keep all of our kids together through their whole childhood experience. I understand that. And we'd like to not have to bus our kids or run them across town to drop them off. But, those are what we'd like to have. And if you look at the flip side, there's certainly something to be said for children learning how to make new friends, functioning in different environments and growing that way socially. So, the board has a very difficult decision, and I have no idea what they're really going to decide on. But this is not something that they chose to do. As Linda said, nobody wants to close a school. This is a necessity issue. So I just encourage you to support whatever decision they make, even though it may not be your cup of tea. It may not be what you really desired, because it's a difficult choice. Thank you.
Mary Ann Ratcliffe.
Just some of my observations in response to the questions that you had put out for Hank and Andy, and obviously they're the experts. It helped me to organize some of my thoughts and reviewing of the notes that we had through our 7-11 committee response. I just have to share, I was talking to a county office of education person this afternoon, and he told me something that contradicted what Andy had said. And I said, oh no. I said, that is not correct. I have it on good authority. And sure enough, he called me back, and Andy was right.
But thank you very much. I think the world of all of you. I appreciate your position this evening. As a member of the 7-Eleven committee who attended 13 meetings on this topic, I just want to share my brief observations. At our first 7-Eleven committee, we talked about reframing the committee not to be a school closure committee, but rather a school possibilities committee. It shouldn't sound naive because we really came up with some amazing, I thought, ideas, and we knew that there were a lot more to tap into. I'm concerned that we may exhaust all of our energies on debating school closure when we can expand our framework to include how do we realize our top goals of providing the best and most innovative learning opportunities for our children, enhancing district revenues, and improving teacher salaries. Now that we have collected so much important information about our schools, we can explore some of the opportunities discussed in the 7-Eleven committee process and in your ongoing thoughtful, intelligent, and insightful review of this issue. And I have great confidence in yours and the community's ability to realize creative, positive, and fruitful solutions to these challenges, which I truly view as possibilities. Thank you so much.
Are there any other public comments? And throughout the evening, if you feel that you need to address the board, please go ahead and fill out a public comment form. And really, the form is just for us to know who's speaking. William Ulrich.
Good evening. William Ulrich, 487 Gridley Road. As a point of information, I'm a candidate for the school board election in November. And I have a few minor comments to make and a couple of major observations, perhaps. And I wanted to make note, and perhaps everyone in the room knows this already, but the City of Ojai is trying to make some effort through the rec department for an after-school program. I understand that that's being operated at the Topa Topa in Miners Oaks for the 2016-17 school year, and at a very reasonable low-cost rate of $10 a day for the afternoon, and that's for grades K through 6th. I just learned this specific information being somewhat familiar with the city of Ojai decreasing in population. I wasn't aware that the valley itself had been decreasing in population to the extent that it has. From 2006 to 2012, that's December 2006 through July 2012, the population of the valley decreased by 9.9%. That's through 2012. Decreased 9.9% between 2006 and 2012. The projections that this information hasn't been updated. It's very accurate, but it hasn't been updated, so there's no reason to believe otherwise based on demographics and some economic factors that are manifested in the Board of Realtors information, which indicates that much of the home sale market is going to folks who are buying second homes in Ojai and in the valley, and as a consequence, they're either weekend residents or part-time second home residents. So what I'm coming to is the projection for the valley to decrease in population, I think, is not only supported historically, but I have not heard anything from any source that indicates otherwise. And I'm basing this on the private market information, which relates to home sales, relates to insurance, it relates to things that are based upon actual market factors in the projections. So many of the considerations, I think, that are faced by the district in general and the board in particular need to be seen within the realities of those figures. And this on top of, within the last decade, the loss of at least 5 substantial businesses that were located in Ojai that net produced approximately 480 jobs. So, and that's concomitant family jobs. So that's significant to my lights, and once again, I haven't seen anything that indicates otherwise. Because the demographic of the folks that are moving in have a tendency of being much older and much wealthier than school-age families. Now, the district, is my understanding, and that the district has sold the first tranche of bonds, Measure J bonds. That was $10 million. I know that I'm personally been paying $800 a year, and I'm concerned that these bond funds are not to date performing their intended purposes. The Citizens Oversight Committee does not appear to have met since April. At that meeting, we're actually meeting before that there were 20 to 30 outstanding incomplete Measure A, that's from 1997, permits, which appear to be preventing forward motion on Measure J funded work. And in conjunction with what appears to be the Balfour-Beatty Measure J cost estimates, starting with the Nordhoff Gymnasium, being substantially low by an order of 50 or 60% magnitude, raises the question of whether that cost estimates being offered in substantially low, being endemic for all of the Measure J proposed work.
William, I'm sorry, but could you talk more about the schools? We're all aware of this, the Measure J issues.
Well, okay.
In your 3 minutes, the 3 minutes
Okay.
have passed you right now.
In closing, then I'll leave it at this. While you may be aware of it, I haven't heard how the way out of this conundrum.
Well, I believe our business office is working on that. Andy could probably speak to that, and if you wish to make an appointment with him, he would be able to
As well.
explain that to you, and that probably would be a good thing.
It sounds like a good thing.
Yeah.
I will do that. Thanks so
Okay,
much.
you're welcome. Thanks for your comments. Salvador Rivera.
I'll be really quick. I actually wasn't planning on speaking, but first and foremost, for the 5 members of the board, I want to thank you wholeheartedly for having the courage to actually take this on. I know that this is a huge endeavor, and quite frankly, something that I believe should have been started years ago, but it's finally taking you 5 to really take it by the horns and go with it. So thank you very much for that. Having said that, the one thing I would like, my hope is, and what I would ask from you 5 is that we expand this a little bit more than talking about a reconfiguration of the elementary schools, because as some of these speakers before me have spoken, there's still some fear out there, are they closing my school? What's going on? I think there's a bigger picture here, and I think you guys are kind of getting at that, but maybe the way it's communicated out to us in the public, we don't see it that way. But there's a lot of other items that I think are part of this decision that also need to be talked about. Some of them are on your list of questions that you have tonight. For example, the 6th grade going to Matilaha and so forth. Some of them are not, and I think that they're important pieces of it. The biggest one being what a lot of these teachers have come up over the past few months and talked about, which is their salary. They feeling that they're not being compensated appropriately for what they do. And I can personally attest to the Miners Oaks teachers that I have come across, and I'm amazed at what they're able to do with what limited resources they have. I mean, they can, it amazes me. So I've said it publicly before, I think one of the biggest assets we have are our teachers here in this district, and definitely they need to be compensated appropriately, and as far as salary, we're nowhere near that. However, we haven't looked at the big picture. The big picture is, if you take a look, first of all, 86% of the total budget, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, goes to compensation. which is actually, I think, a little bit above the mean for the area. But even more so, if you look at the benefits package that these teachers here receive, especially if they've been here 15 years or more, that's the best, definitely in the county, and I don't have the facts to back this up, but I would say among the best in the state. So that's all a part of what I think has to be this conversation. We have to give them what's just, but we also have to make sure that it's within our means as a district. I mean, you guys have said it, we're one of the smallest districts as far as students, and therefore as far as what we receive at ADA because of that. So we have a limited pot to work with, and so I would just say let's expand this conversation as much as we can and bring all of these pieces into that conversation, and maybe use this as a way of not saying it's a reconfiguration of schools, but more so of a planning session for a strategic vision for maybe 5 years out, 10 years out. Where do we want to see this district, and what are the steps we need to do to get there? Thank you for your time.
All right, so we have, are there any others that are, one more? Okay. Gina, and I can't read your last name.
Braggett.
Okay.
So I just wanted to come and bring you these brochures that Susie told you about. Worked very hard on these to prepare them for you. Sorry I'm late. Also had to cancel my PTA meeting to be here. Very important PTA meeting. First PTA meeting. So I just want you to know how special our school is. So I hope that you will take the time to look at these. I'm going to bring them forward. It's a draft. That's all I got. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a draft. Yeah. This is beautiful. Don't worry, I won't publish material without district approval.
Dr. Bangser, would you like to say a few words before we started deliberation?
Sure, thanks, Linda. So, as you walked in tonight, there was a series of papers, and as people have often said, what's a superintendent without paper? So you have a packet, and the packet was created in large part from materials that already existed before tonight. Obviously, the agenda is specific to tonight. Everything else has appeared in some form one or more times in the last number of months. And so for those of you who've been following the 7-Eleven committee and other deliberations, board meetings, et cetera, there probably won't be anything here tonight that is of any surprise. And therefore, I'm not going to take a lot of time to go over certainly the materials other than my green sheet. And I will promise you that the green sheet was edited down from numerous more pages than this to be as cogent as possible. And again, for those people in the audience who've ever made a presentation at the board, who had done it either in hard copy or PowerPoint, you know that I have a golden rule, and that is you never read what has already been written, because people can read more quickly than you can speak. So you will not hear me reading this document, but there are a number of things I wanted to accomplish tonight. As I said to the board, really just to set the infrastructure for the conversation tonight, a week from tonight, and numerous other Wednesdays in the upcoming weeks, coupled with regular board meetings in that period of time. I would have a subtitle of Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 in this two-sided sheet that would go something like, number 1, I would call process, number 2, something along the lines of substance and options, and number 3 would be criteria and roles of participants. Again, since as I look at the audience, I know so many of you, I know you followed not only what's been in the Ojai Valley News, but other publications on our website. You have a sense of what's preceded tonight and what is upcoming, so you can follow along. This work that we're doing now is about 18 months old, if you want to call it that. And the reason why I recommended to the former board that this present board attack this issue, Salvador, appreciate your comments. I think you're spot on that. The reason I recommended it is because we knew come several months before the election in 2014 that 2 longtime members were not going to be continuing. Kathy Smith and Ricky Horn decided not to run again, and then another very long-time member ran but was not successful in being reelected. So we knew we'd have at least 2 and maybe 3 new board members as of November, December of 2014. In fact, we had 3. So now you can follow along and you can see that quite soon after the board organized itself, we had numerous conversations about how to deal with property in the district. We know, we talked about the district office property. I'll get to that in a little while. And in and among those various conversations, the board unanimously agreed to construct the 711 committee to address the kinds of issues that are in the first hyphen, if you will. And that is the enrollment challenge that we are facing now and have had for 20 years or so, but more precipitous in the last number of years. And as or more important, certainly more important to the users, that is the students and parents and faculty, to have a curriculum that is the absolute optimal one we can have. So as you look at the chart from 2000 to 2016, I don't have a row in there for 2016-17 because, as is written below, the official enrollment doesn't come forth until early October. But you can follow all those things that have happened. You can see that there was a drop of almost 4,200 down to under 2,600 in those years from 1997, almost 20 years. And in fact, we are seeing another enrollment drop in this coming year, where most of the drop in enrollment in the district is actually found in the elementary schools number of students. So that's the first enclosure tonight. That is the history of our enrollment and a little bit of an insight as to where we're going, we think, this coming year. As far as the 711 committee is concerned, again, you can read all this and you can see they were, I learned, one of the most aggressive in terms of number of meetings and the scope of their work in Ventura County in recent years. In fact, our attorney said that to meet more than 10 times is very unusual. Sometimes 711 committees only meet 3 or 4 times. So ours met 13 times, and you can see in the executive summary, now this is sort of clipped out and put together, but I think it tells the story. We had one space where we had to cut and paste, and a date got out of line, but it still tells the story perfectly. As you go past the summary of the recommendations and go on to the California Education Code definition of the 711 committee's work, as you get to the last 2 pages, again, all back to back, you can follow the path of just sort of drop down from May 10th for a minute, March 10th, go down to March 3rd, and you can see that at that meeting, the 711 committee took those various positions and went school by school. For those of you who've seen the video, Glenn Fout worked around the table and asked for a vote on each school, and you can see the results. And it was from that March 3rd conversation that the tentative position of the 711 committee was passed by a very small margin, 6-5, to close Miners Oak School. Tentative position, it's important to remember that term because we'll come back to that. On March 10th, the committee had actually set aside the date just for a regular meeting. Well, we were learning early that day and actually the day before that we better move the meeting from the boardroom to the Chaparral Auditorium. And it was a good thing we did because about 200 people showed up and numerous statements made initially from a number of people from San Antonio and then the great majority from Miners Oaks. And you can see that at the end of that meeting, the position was in fact defeated to retain all 5 schools. But there wasn't any action taken on Miners Oaks specifically. And so as you then turn the page, go to the back of the second page, the record of motions, which of course this all comes from Marianne Ratcliffe, the wonderful secretary of the committee, you can see, and you probably know that the rescission of the vote, the tentative vote on March 3rd, then the official vote on March 17th, which became the position of the committee, was unanimously to take Miners Oaks off the table as a school to close, and the vote was 7-4 to keep all 5 schools open. So that was the work of the 711 committee. Going forward, after tonight, you can read what's happening. Next Wednesday night, is the second of the special meetings for board conversation, and that's the focus of our work here. Their work together is to converse about these options that I'll get to in just a minute. So after next Wednesday night, we have another meeting set for the Wednesday night after that. The agenda for next Wednesday night will be set at the end of the conversation tonight. There's some options, but I'll remember that that is something that we need to do, and Linda will manage that conversation. All right, and then as you proceed on beyond the first date of the public hearing, presently scheduled for September 28th, we move toward October 17th as the date that the board set back in May for its decision. So that's the calendar up to tonight, sort of tonight and after tonight. The second category is the options for future, and I would call it, I've always called it configuration, because there's no in this. And there's no guarantee, there's no assumption that there will be a reconfiguration, because the present configuration absolutely could continue for however long. And so all of the options that have been on the table for these last couple of months, number of months, maybe more than a couple, are included at the bottom of the first page of my outline, except one. And that is that the more I studied the possibility of closing Topa Topa, the less it became a realistic choice. And it isn't because I feel more positively about it. It has nothing to do with it. It's geographical, it's size, it's having to move students across town and creating all kinds of additional traffic. If in fact it were to be closed, it just simply is not geographically proximate to be able to do it, meaning something less than 5 schools well. And so I'll take responsibility for making that recommendation. That's why when you take a look at the bottom, I think I've included every possibility, including obviously the first one of keeping all 5 schools open. And you can read the rest. If you can come up with another one that I don't have here, I'm happy to hear what it is, and you can write to me and I'll include it in future documentation. Okay, on the backside then of this outline, for space purposes, if in fact the board were to move to implement the choice that actually one member of the 7-11 committee, one, maybe 2, but certainly 1, forwarded as the best choice, which was to have 2 elementary schools, one large on the west side, one large on the east side, in this case, what's called Topa Topa East, Miners Oaks and Miramati on the west, with combining a student body of most of those 2 schools in one school. In terms of number of seats available and size of the school and other considerations, that's the only time that I could say definitively that the 6th grade would need to move to the middle school. Now, I have some thoughts about the 6th grade as a middle school, in a middle school configuration, which I'm sure I'll share before we're all done conversing, not necessarily tonight, but in the upcoming weeks. But I'm recommending that the board, in its deliberations, assume that the present configuration of grades would continue. That is TK through 6 in the elementary schools, because the bigger challenge is if you go TK through 5 and then you don't have enough space and you decide to keep 6th grade, then you're up against it. So I would say the more conservative approach for this conversation is to see how board members feel about having those TK through 6th grades. And then if at some point this year, next year, for upcoming years, that it becomes the best decision to move the 6th grade, you can always do that. But I would never want the board to make a decision on which schools to keep open by assuming that the 6th grade would move. I think that would be an error. It might be absolutely the right thing to do, but I don't think that an elementary school decision should be based on moving the 6th grade. I think you're starting out behind the 8 ball with the 6th grades moving if you do that. So that's the end of section 2. Section 3, again, I'm sure there are many other criteria that could have been under A. I want to talk just a little bit about the number of students span that it's in the the span that is in the last hyphen area. I picked that span because it's 100 students above, we think, about 100 students above and below where we are this year. It is true, as Annika said, that the delinquent report shows not only Miners Oaks increasing the most among the schools, but also about 5, 6 years from now, the elementary student body increasing beyond 1,400. Andy and I think that's too high. We just do. And when I think back on the conversations that I think Thane and I had in particular about demographers, we both expressed concern about that whole business of trying to predict the future. The fact is, by law, you have to do a demographic study. Okay, they were the most highly regarded firm, and I think the number's too high, but that's just myself speaking. It actually doesn't matter that much whether they're 1220, 1320, or 1420. I think you can make a good decision about the schools in any one of those number configurations. As far as B is concerned, I wrote this really thinking very carefully about the words that I wanted to pick. And I hope you understand that, as many of you have said tonight, I really appreciate the speakers almost to a person acknowledging how difficult this issue is for these 5 people, because it is. It is. It's one of the very few issues, if you merge sort of B and C, it's one of the very few issues where board members, because they're elected by the community, live next to those people who elected them, and that's the purpose of the democracy. It's one of those emotional community issues that, in my opinion, and I've been through this a number of times in other places, not necessarily school closing, but school opening, reconfigurations, where the board needs to be viewed as in the lead and not waiting for a recommendation typically from me or through meat from somebody else. And so that's really what is going to be happening. The board members are going to be developing that tentative position of the board, which will then be the forerunner of the public hearing or hearings, and they will receive comments about the tentative position that they took, just like the 7-Eleven committee did after their March 3rd vote, and had both an ad hoc, unexpected public hearing on March 10th, and then a scheduled one on March 17th, and in fact, as you know, reversed a 6-5 vote to an 11-0 vote the other way. And finally then, just to be more specific, my role is to serve as the primary counselor advisor. Andy will be working with me on that. I'll certainly be seeking out opinions of professional staff along the way. But unlike the great high majority of issues that come before the board, because technically the board is supposed to act on a recommendation, my recommendation, in those situations where the law calls for it. My experience, as I said before, is that when we're at the back end of this and the board makes its decision, it is not the best policy for the board to respond to a specific recommendation, particularly on the front end from the superintendent. Because, and I'll just take myself completely out of the equation, no matter how much the superintendent is beloved or disliked, respected or not, staying for a year or 20 years, okay, it is the board's responsibility to deal with a community issue of this type, and they know I will always be there for them, with them, and will play a role if it turns out that that's the best thing for me to do as their discussion unfolds, and it looks like that's where I need to be, and that is to either help coalesce a plan or make a specific recommendation. So that's where we are tonight, where we've come from, and where we'll be going, and appreciate it. And if you look through the other attachments, you'll see that each one was noted in the outline in bold, and I'm sure, again, you can figure out what all these are, but the interdistrict and intradistrict charts, I've said numerous times, as recently as May 3rd, how critical that is to our district, both in terms of students coming into the district. You know, we have a wonderful, significant group of students coming from, particularly from Oakview, some from Santa Paula, and you can see the impact of that over the last number of years. That interdistrict, intra-district comment was made tonight about the situation that we find ourselves in now more than we were 10 years ago with intra-district choices, but that is in fact where we are. The next document, the last one, is a document that Andy created for the 7-Eleven committee that has now been expanded and enhanced as a result, and you can see from the questions in the agenda, by a couple of board members asking for another look at things like Measure J savings and a few other elements that were not part of the original chart. That's it.
Thank you, Hank. Each of us has our questions on our agenda, and my suggestion is that we go through the questions one at a time. Each one of us can give our thoughts on on each question. The discussion could be short, could be long, but I think we owe it to the community and to each other, because we came up with these questions ourselves, to discuss these. And we might also add in some other things that were suggested by the speakers, such as the issue of segregation, and also the issue of the decreasing number of people living in Ojai. I know I lived in Santa Barbara in the early 70s, and the entire Santa Barbara County was on water restrictions because we had a drought then. People moved away in droves. They closed many, many elementary schools. I don't remember how many, one junior high. And eventually those schools were reopened as after Santa Barbara hooked up with state water, but it was very, very dire for quite a while. And so I hope we don't have that kind of situation here, but I don't think that we're going to have water issues resolved at any point, and it will certainly affect our population. So let's start with question number 1. How might student education be affected with a consolidation? So Michael, would you like to start that off, and we'll just go down the line here?
I've thought about this, and I am sensitive to the conversations that talked about having a colleague at the campus with you and having folks physically present. But I do reflect on that this is the 21st century, and there are a lot of technology platforms for communicating both via visual. I mean, every laptop now, every tablet has a camera in it. It doesn't take much to hook up to Skype or Facebook or all kinds of different things. And I think that even at the sacrifice of daily collaboration, there are opportunities to create structured collaboration, either, as I say, via a tech platform or other types of arrangements. So I think for me, the arguments of having colleagues physically present are not as compelling as some of the other arguments. Because I do see that, I think and I've said this before, I think one of the things that this offers us an opportunity to do is look at the way we do things and not do the same things the same way moving forward. And so to the extent that collaboration is a desirable thing, I think there are other ways of getting there, not necessarily the only thing, but there are alternate ways of getting there besides consolidating schools. So for me, I didn't find that to be a real compelling decision help. I think it's important, but it wasn't like a deal maker for me. That's it.
Sure. So I guess the big question here is, what does education mean? Which is an interesting question. 18 months ago, I would have easily answered this by saying reducing the number of combo classes is an absolute win, and it's worth doing almost anything to reduce the number of combo classes. There are a lot of other educational components that go into the mix. I have a couple of thoughts that don't fit neatly, but they kind of fit into this topic. Go for it. And the one thing that occurred to me is in a larger district, you get a lot of benefit from consolidating and getting grades together and teachers together and all those sorts of things. Ojai is a special place, and we're not, for a lot of reasons, ever going to be able to out-consolidate a big district. There's just no way we can do it. We're not going to get the money from the state. There are just a lot of reasons. But what can Ojai do better than anybody else? We have very unique campuses throughout the valley. And the benefit of having unique educational experiences that parents can choose from and students can benefit from based on their personalities, based on their way of learning, is something that we can probably do better than a lot of other districts. And I think that we need to balance those two things. It's kind of interesting for me. Like I said, 18 months ago, I had some different opinions, but I've learned a lot talking with parents, talking with teachers, hearing the voices from the community, and the 7-Eleven committee, what an amazing resource and all the information that came from that. I've gone on too much on this topic. I'll be shorter on others, but I think that consolidation provides a benefit in some educational aspects, but it could potentially harm us in others.
Well, I liked what both Michael and Thane had to say on that subject, and I will just add, I think personally my inclination is to believe that educational benefits are highly speculative, but the trauma that would ensue from closing a school is obvious. So I would never want to make that decision based on speculation. Some of you out there may not know, we have a policy in our district of allowing pretty much pure intra-district transfer. That is, anyone within the district can go to any other school within the district. So it's sort of interesting. I'm, of course, paying attention to the national debate, and to hear Trump talk about school choice, and how important school choice is. Well, we actually have school choice in our valley, and I think that's something that we should try and preserve. We have 18 questions, so I'll leave it at that. Although there is another important thing to mention, which is that the situation we have in Miners Oaks, which it clearly is, it has a higher Latino population than is represented demographically by the surrounding area. Not only is, because the commentator had mentioned, I'm sorry, I have your name written down, but Susie, yeah. We're aware of that, and you kind of suggested that maybe the school board and the school district should sort of be aware of it and take action. Well, the truth is, because of, and I can't think of the name of the category into which Miners Oaks falls because of test scores, we're obligated to allow intra-district transfer. So not only are we not allowed to institute a rule that would keep people at Miners Oaks, we're legally obligated to allow them to go anywhere they want. So.
What I was saying was that having a magnet school allows for a voluntary movement, meaning the parents that have chose to go to Topa, if there's different programs in place that specialize in what we're kind of pointing at magnet school, they offer specialized curriculum that will voluntarily attract those parents back. And that's what the courts are actually encouraging school districts to do.
You're talking about like the ideas for Miners Oaks becoming a green school and the, cool, okay.
The magnet schools have a unique way of encouraging voluntary movement of students because it cannot be dictated. It has to by law be
Right.
voluntary. But if you offer someone a choice that in their mind appears to be better than what they originally chose, they're likely to voluntarily move back to that lower performing school or to the school where there's more minorities. But it is on a voluntary basis. And that's where I'm not seeing any, or not so much recently, because we've had many discussions with Hank and with Andy about things that we need to do better at Miners Oaks to make those opportunities for voluntary movement.
Good point. I didn't understand. I'm glad we had that talk. And that's kind of what I think Thane was suggesting as well, just kind of the idea of schools becoming sort of having specialties. And I know that was one of the things the 7-Eleven committee talked about.
Can I just offer something
And
here?
I'm done. It's your turn.
Oh, well, it's actually Jane's turn. We welcome comments from the audience, but if you'd use the microphone, then everyone can hear you, because I think probably the people in the back couldn't hear your great comment, Susie. Thank you. Okay, Jane is next.
Now I'm all over the place in thoughts. I think that was actually kind of one of my questions. I do agree with Michael that although I think a majority of the teachers felt having one or more colleagues on campus was helpful, they didn't feel that it was imperative in today's world. But what I have seen because of our budget problems is a loss of more of a support for education in our librarians, our computer lab, our art teachers, those support systems that I feel are imperative. I think of one of my sons who would go into the library and he had read all of those books and all of those books, and the librarian knew what he liked. And she said, I think you should start this series. And I never had heard of that series. So obviously to have someone with that kind of specialty assisting the teachers is just a small example of what I mean by consolidating and bringing in the possibility of having a 3-hour librarian here and a 1-hour librarian here, or paid for by the PTA, pulling those things together. And I do have concerns about providing the best we can as our budget, our enrollment numbers decline, but because of our step column on salaries, our expenses are going up. So even if we stayed the same on enrollment and we didn't decline, we have to remember that our expenses, even our water and our electricity, is going up, right? The expense of everything is going up as our enrollment is staying steady or slightly declining or slightly enrolling. Anyone who's paid Golden State water bills know. Prices are going up. So that's what we're hoping to do, is look into the future and say, are we on the best path? And if we are, that's great. If we need to make turns, if we need to, what do we need to do to this path to stay in the best possible scenario for our students?
I also agree with Michael about technology aiding in collaboration, and I agree with Jane about the libraries and the computer labs in the elementary schools that are not staffed anymore with staff people. I think some of the ideas are really wonderful about creating green schools and things like that, and magnet schools. These are hypothetical ideas at this point. We don't have staffing in our administration that can work on things like this, because we have reduced our administrative staffing over the years because of the budget problems we've had. So we are just operating bare bones, really, really bare bones with our administrators. And this happens at the schools also. And I think that we tried years ago to pass a parcel tax. Many of you will remember when we did try this. I believe it failed by only 71 votes or something like that, the last parcel tax. We actually tried to pass 2 parcel taxes. Parcel tax money would have gone to salaries and to school improvements. We don't have that money, and we need it. We desperately need it. So we have to come up with other alternatives now. And thinking about how we could best affect education and make it the best possible for our students, I really do think that having collaborative abilities with someone who's right next door to you works best. There's also the fact that when you have 2 or 3 third grades, for example, if a student is having a difficult time in one classroom, they can go to a different classroom. And with our current situation in most of the schools, the student stays in that room and would have to transfer schools if it really becomes unbearable. And I hate the thought of that happening. Because I moved around so much with my military background, I know how it feels when you are in a classroom that doesn't fit and you have to stay there because there aren't any other alternatives. But I just think we have to think of ways that we can really bring some of these things back that we don't have anymore. So let's move on to number 2. Do students in each elementary school receive the same education? And I think actually we had that answered, that they do. They get the same education. They are all getting outstanding training. We have a pretty good variety of experienced teachers. We're more than a little bit top heavy with our experienced teachers. And we have some new young teachers that have come in, and hopefully we'll be able to keep them with the wonderful schools that we have, the wonderful communities. and that we'll be able to have them stay and can complete their educational experience with us. Did any of you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is I don't think it's a binary answer to say they do, because I think clearly people in our school district make choices, and their parents make choices based on their perception of the best place for their kid to get an education. So I think that while clearly the curriculum is unified, there are lots of differences. I mean, we went to, I live in the San Antonio district, and we went there a year. Wasn't for us. So we're at TOPA. So I think, and I think that actually kind of goes to a core question in all of this, which is the parents and the kids and their very particular experiences with school, their very particular individual experiences with school and their relationship to the schools they go to. And I hope we'll be talking more about that.
Let me just add, I kind of take the same tack that Kevin does on this, in that, I don't disagree with Linda, though. I think in terms, no, I don't. I mean, I think the interesting part here, again, is what is education. And in terms of the curriculum, I think we're really good about teaching. As mentioned, I think we have a lot of great teachers. But as Kevin said, we have very, very different educational experiences. Students who attend Summit are getting a very different experience than the students who attend TOPA. That's just the way it is. And every one of our schools has a different personality. Again, I want to go back to the topic of reducing combo classes. I think that would help a lot of students. But I have talked to a lot of parents and a lot of teachers who have said, well, it might, but I don't care. This is what I want. This is the kind of school experience that I want. And I think that that's really important. I think all of those things weigh in. What has happened recently that I think is worth bringing up is our TK program. There was some outreach to parents, and they said, okay, we're going to have this really great TK program at one campus. Why would you like to join in, even though you'd normally go to another school? And that has worked out quite well, I think, so far in the first, week? So it's proven. No. But we'll see how that goes over time. But I think those kinds of models are worth looking at as we approach other grades and other situations.
Quickly, I think that I have to echo what Thane and Kevin have said as well. I think that, we have Common Core and we have the unified curriculum. We have supremely competent instructors. So the facts are the same at every location. The culture is different. Each environment is different. And I do value those differences, and I think it's really good that we have been able to offer parents some of these choices. My concern, on the other hand, is that when you're a very small district, and we are a very small district, you can't always be all things to all people. And at some point, we have to determine how many separate cultures can we afford to support, and how do we find out what is desirable in each of those cultures and replicate that across the district. Because if it's good at one spot, there might be some benefit to the other colleges, the other campuses as well. I'm still at work. The other campuses as well. So I think that they are different. My concern is just how much difference can we afford to support.
Number 3, what is the community attachment at each school, realizing that it is not quantifiable? Jane, you want to comment on that?
I think it's obvious. I mean, you have your local grocery store that you prefer, you have your school that you prefer, you have the church that you prefer. We have a lot of choices here in Ojai, so I don't think that needs discussion. I do think that as humans, we naturally don't like change, and I also think that personally, I have stated things that I would never do that I then did and found they weren't so bad. So I know there's both sides of that, but I do think that that is the hardest question, or that would be the hardest piece of this puzzle to put together, is how you can make a decision that would affect a family personally if their school was closed.
Well, it's sort of, similar to the prior discussion. I would add, though, that I'm not sure it's just a question of the church or the school you prefer. I think there's also an element of, and this is maybe embodied in some other questions, but it's an element of what a school means in a community. Not just that you prefer to go to that school, but that there is a school there. I think it has meaning in and of itself, like a hospital or a police station. It's a place that becomes ingrained, part of the fabric of a place. And that's, later down we're gonna start talking about one of my primary questions, which is what becomes of a school property if we were to close it? I just can't imagine what it would do to our community to have razor wire and fence around a rusting school site in such a small place. Particularly, if we're talking about a place like Miners Oaks or a school right in the middle of a neighborhood.
Just 10 seconds worth. If you don't think that there's an attachment, I've got dozens of hours of video online for you to watch. Yes, there is attachment.
I think, like Kevin said, this is something that's really something you can't quantify, and every school community feels like a family. I know that when I was teaching at Nordhoff, that's how I felt. I felt like it was my family, and it is very definitely something that we know and we will consider, because all of this weighs into our decisions. Number 4, how would school closure affect inter-district transfers? Anybody want to start on that?
I would. I think this question is difficult to address until we get a sense of what each of us is thinking, or as a group, what we think about, because obviously it's a very different effect if we close Miramani versus if we close, I don't know who has the least amount of transfers, Topa maybe? And San Antonio. Yeah, so it's hard to discuss as a general question until we really, are we talking about Miners Oaks? Are we talking about Miramani? Are we talking about San Antonio?
So to be clear, what we're talking about, we have these two concepts we throw around: inter-district and intra-district. Intra-district is within our district. The transfers, people, we talked about it, they can go wherever they want. Inter-district is sort of the way we are a net importer of students in our district. So we get more students than leave our district, meaning we actually have revenue because we have people who see Ojai as a place where they want to bring their kids, even though they're in a different district. There's a great article from yesterday's LA Times on the subject of school of choice. I won't get into the weeds on it, but it was highlighting Oak Park, and how Oak Park has really been a magnet, not in the colloquial, or in the colloquial sense, magnet as in bringing tons of students to their district, and it has made a huge impact. They have just a huge number of inter-district transfers into that district because people perceive it as a really high quality education. So, things like that, phenomenon like that do exist.
I'd just like to quickly say, I know there will be an impact. Secondly, I have absolutely no idea how much of an impact. We have heard from parents. I think that there are students transferring in from outside our district to at least, well, maybe all the schools, but at least 4 of the 5. Now, will parents not come into the district if we make changes? Some of them say they won't, but I think Jane said, I say things all the time. You know, I would never do something, and then circumstances change, and you find it's still the right thing to do. But I think that we would ultimately lose students by making changes, whether it's 1, whether it's 20, whether it's more. I have absolutely no idea. I think that would be the biggest risk we would take, but I think it's almost impossible to quantify.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I don't think anybody really knows. And to say that there is some number sort of ignores the fact that if there were some closures, we would expect changes at the remaining schools. And so those changes might actually become attractive enough to keep people within the district. And I do think over time, that would probably even itself out. Again, I'm not sure for me personally that that is the basis of the decision, but it's certainly a factor to consider.
Well, I believe that students have friends at school and they want to stay with their friends. So even if the friends transfer to a different school, those kids will probably want to go with them because those are the people that they've established their relationships with. And so I think there might be a few parents who would choose not to bring their kids, but the children will be upset if they don't get to go with their friends. So anyway. Number 5, how would neighborhood students be affected if we close that?
Well, I think, so how would neighborhood students be affected? So what, these are obviously students who are in a neighborhood are going to the school that is in their living area. So one thing that I know has come up quite a bit is whether now you're busing kids all around who otherwise would walk to school. From an environmental perspective, that would be certainly a shame. And it's, you know, there's nothing better than a neighborhood school into which kids walk from the neighborhood.
Yeah, I would like to argue against a lot of the things I've already said. This is a tremendously difficult decision because there are so many factors that go into it. I think obviously there would be a huge negative impact by students not being able to walk to a school that they've always walked to, families walking to the school together. I do, however, believe that some of those students would benefit from not being in combo classes, from being in a class, I think was mentioned earlier, having the option of 2 or 3 different classes at a single school site, that they could go to the class that best suits their personality. I think that's a factor. Is it the overriding factor? I don't necessarily think so, but I do think that a lot of students would benefit from that.
I would just like to point out that 415 of our families choose not to go to their neighborhood school and prefer to drive. So that's significant in our district. But personally, I chose, even though we were at a preschool where most children were going to one of the elementaries, we chose our neighborhood school rather than that elementary because I wanted to walk to school with my kids. So I love having neighborhood schools.
Yeah, well, you know, I walked to school through rain and sleet and snow. No, actually not that, but it was in Sacramento. We had never had snow. But I mean, I walked to school and I thought that was great. But I'm as concerned about what the student experiences when they get to school. And so, you know, for me, that's kind of a higher priority than being able to bike to school. And I am very supportive of the Complete Streets project to give a safe path to every one of our schools. I think that's a very laudable thing, even though there might be some controversy around it. So to me, if there were closures, the remaining schools would be strengthened. I think we would not do something that would weaken the curriculum. And so, if we have stronger neighborhood schools, if not as many of them, I still think that the connection would be there. But for me, it's really more about what happens when they get there. And how they get there is important, but secondary.
One of the things when we asked this question of our staff, the administrative staff, the suggestion was given to us that students who would be, if we close the school, students going to a new campus would have the option of choosing whichever one they wanted to go to. So they could go with their friends, for example, to any of the other open elementary schools. And those kids would receive first choice so that they would have the opportunity to feel comfortable about where they were going to be going. So I think that is important to note. And I really think, like Mike says, we can improve our safe pathways to school, and particularly kids, ensuring that kids are able to bike to school. I think that's really important. And I really feel if we can make our schools stronger, the strongest they can possibly be, that would be the greatest benefit to our students.
Can I ask, I guess, Andy, so this year with the TK program, Topa TK students are going to their local school and getting on a bus and going to Miramani, correct?
That's correct. There's a couple students who are doing that. The other ones have chosen to drive.
And a few years ago, we didn't have kindergarten at Summit, but the parents went to Summit and were given a bus to San Antonio. So there is still the possibility, if we feel for strengthening the schools, that we need to close a school, that students could still walk to their school, possibly, depending on, like Kevin said, what are we going to be doing with that property, and getting a school bus to their new campus. Right? It's an option.
I also think if we do ever get an offer for the district office property, which, we keep hearing, I know the 7-Eleven committee suggested that we actively search. Well, that's a good idea, but you have to have staff to do that, someone who can go and beat the bushes. And our administrative staff is involved with making sure that our school campuses are run properly. And we don't have grant writers because we don't have the money for someone like that. And I think that it's really important to keep all those things in mind. If we do close a school, we would certainly keep it maintained. We wouldn't let it be surrounded by razor wire. I don't think. It would not look good. And, we would probably hold it in reserve so that at some point, Chaparral High School and the district office could move to that site if if the economy gets to the point where some great, fabulous, imaginative and wealthy entrepreneur wants to come and take over our site. So, obviously the district offices would have to go somewhere. They would need to have a place to house all of the various activities that our staff do. So neighborhood schools are, definitely going to be kept.
Linda, may I jump in?
Sure.
There was actually a survey that I had the elementary principals assist with over the past 24 hours, and so I wanted to provide that information to you on this topic of transportation to and from school. Unfortunately, just like the brochure, it was hot off the press when I came over here, so I don't have copies for everyone. But what we did was we surveyed the 2nd and 5th grade cohorts at each of the school sites this morning, asking them 2 questions. First was, how did they arrive at school this morning? And then the second question was, at any point in the prior week, so last week during those 5 days, did you, arrive to school by foot, either bicycle, walk, skateboard? And what the results that we have, I do believe actually this is reliable, at least for a trend, although of course it would have been great to have survey all students, but to avoid too grave a disruption, we got roughly a third of our student population surveyed during this time, and so I believe it's a reliable sample. What we see is that Myers Oaks does have nearly half of the students who travel by foot. The other 4 school sites vary between 0% up to just under a quarter of the students who travel by foot to the campus or traveled this morning. And if you look at students who traveled at some point last week by foot, you're roughly in about a third of the student population. That includes Myers Oaks across all the school sites. Yes, foot includes bicycle. Did not take a vehicle to school. So I just wanted to make sure you guys did have that piece of information when you do discuss, the neighborhood schools and the ability to avoid the, increased carbon footprint and other factors that right now we have 70 to 100% of students at particular school sites who are traveling via vehicle.
Oh, I'm just looking
so
at.
the numbers are for Miners Oaks, 44% of the students walked, skateboard, or bike, 51% took a personal vehicle, and 5% took a school bus. For Miramonte, 17% walked, skateboarded, or bicycled, 76% took a personal vehicle, 7% rode the school bus. For San Antonio, 2% walked, skateboard, or bicycle, 92% in a personal vehicle, 6% in a school bus. For Summit, 0 on a school bus, 0 walk, skateboarding, or bike, 100% in a personal vehicle. For Topa Topa, 23% walked or biked, 6% on the school bus, and 70% in a personal vehicle.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
Hi, I have a parent of a child at San Antonio, and I just hope that as you think about this question about children riding, how they get to school in cars, that it could in part be that it's connected to a larger issue about bus routes, in part. My child lives a half mile from the school. It takes an hour and 20 minutes to get home on the bus. So I think that it's important to know that with a car issue, some of it may be parents responding to make sure their children get a little more sleep. School starts at 7:40 at San Antonio. And just that right now, a lot of our buses are actually going to 3 sites before kids start getting dropped off. So I just wanted to add that. I don't know if anyone knows about that.
Thank you. That's an important aspect of this. Thank you.
I just wanted to, Linda, you said some things about the properties that I think are kind of maybe confusing, honestly. I mean, so this issue of the district property, has been raised. There's a whole process that would have to occur. It kind of occurred once already in terms of an advisory committee looking at that property and wondering what might be done with it and suggesting that alternatives be looked at. We recently, Andy did a sort of a pro forma of what we might do in terms of moving district services from the district office elsewhere. It's pretty complicated. Beyond that, we've already had at least one meeting with the city, just trying to coordinate with each other. There's a pretty well, I think, known, question about what would be an appropriate use of that property, given that it is right in the center of Ojai. And people are already talking about traffic in Ojai, and what would a very rich person who was going to develop that property would obviously expect to make a lot of money, and you make a lot of money through a lot of traffic and a lot of business. So is that something that feasibly would be appropriate for that property? This is all in the future if any of that comes to pass. So I just want to be clear that that's where things are, and I don't think that's part of our discussion here with the elementary schools. I don't know if you want to chime in, Hank.
Well, just real quickly, so it's been mentioned a number of times, and when you read the The summary of the 7-Eleven committee recommendations, it's replete with references to the fact that the district office should move elsewhere, whether it was Miners Oaks at some point in time when Miners Oaks was considered for that short period of time to be considered for closing, or some other place. And the fact is that we've had ongoing conversations with potential developers over the last 2 to 5 years who sort of come and go in terms of their own interest in Ojai compared to other places. You also know, I'm sure, I think it would be fair to say that that in the city of Ojai, at least, there is not a strong enthusiasm for building. And so we would wonder exactly who might be able to build something in the city limits that would meet the standards of the city council, albeit I think they've been cooperative in having conversations. The last thing I would say is that, and Annika mentioned this, like what's been done, half of the May 3rd special meeting was assigned to Andy talking about exactly what Kevin just shared, and that is the kind of way in which services might move from the district office to some other place. A significant part of the September 20th regular meeting upcoming will be a presentation and conversation between our district, our school district's real estate attorney, who is a member of the firm that we use for most of our work, and the board. And so I encourage you, if you can come, to listen. If not, check it out on the Channel 10 or on our own website. But I think it'll be very educational to learn, as Kevin just said, how you get to Z from A on the subject of vacating a property of the type that we have on Ojai Avenue and having it be made available to potential purchasers, or since we know that there's no purchaser because the board has said they're not going to sell it, then possibly an organization, a company that might want to lease it. So anyway, that's what's upcoming.
Let's move on to number 6. What changes might our schools experience by combining 2 school PTA, PTOs for their fundraising and volunteer work? Anybody want to start on that?
I'll quickly start. A comment that was in Mr. Wilson's letter, and I think that we've heard from the community elsewhere, is why are we still talking about this? I think that's a really good question. But I think that it's important because we have, over the course of the last year and a half, learned a lot about the different schools, about the different communities, and whether we combine or don't combine, or have a different configuration, we should make those decisions with our eyes wide open. And there are certain advantages and disadvantages. I think this is an area, if schools were combined, I think the PTAs, PTOs would be much stronger. More people could do more things. It could be more vibrant. Is it the right thing to do? That's another question. But would they be stronger? I think they would be.
I actually think in terms of attachment to neighborhood schools, this is probably the stronger attachment than the students themselves. Parents invest a lot of time and energy into supporting their school. They take it personally. It's almost a proprietary interest, and I think that's a good thing. And while I do agree with Thane that many hands make lighter work, sometimes that adjustment in consolidating two structures and a lot of activist folks who kind of have to blend together and reacculturate can be very challenging. And so, I go into this knowing that if you force 2 PTOs or 2 PTAs together, what you might get is fission, not cooperation. And that's really not what we want. But by the same token, nobody's going to get everything that they want. A good decision is going to mean everybody has a little bit of sacrifice and everybody has a little bit of adjustment. So I recognize that if I've spent the last 6 years taking a couple of kids through this school and putting my blood into the property, not to mention my money, and then see it closed and everything shuffled together, there is going to be an adjustment. And I hope that if we were to get there, that our parents would understand the necessity. That's going to be our job if we go that direction. And will work with us to reinvigorate that newly combined parents group, because there are strengths in numbers and in synergies. But I have no illusion. To me, this is the third rail. This is the place where the difficulty is greatest.
Well, we're talking about the PTA and PTOs, so I'll keep it to that. I mean, I think clearly, if
You know nothing about it.
I'm hoping to see my wife sometime in October. I was just going to say, I mean, I think, being realistic, what's going to happen is not a combination. There will be exiled PTA, PTO people from a school that's closed who will then show up in a new school. And, that's one area where I'm confident that these people, most of them, or many of them sitting in this room are the kinds of people that no matter what are always helpful and proactive and doing good things for our school. So I don't think we will lose that, but I'll save further comments as we go along these. We only have 18 total of these, so don't worry. It's going to get very interesting though. We have a PowerPoint that's just going to blow your minds. Kidding.
I think on this issue, we have some amazing group of principals at the schools, and the principals are going to be very helpful in helping not only students, but also the parents, the people who are working so hard in the various PTAs and PTOs to, continue their efforts if that's what they choose to do. Also, I think parents realize that their students are at these schools really they're there for 7 years if they start in kindergarten, but then they're going to go on to the junior high and then the high school. So I think that everyone realizes that it's a transient population, but of course the elementary schools, the students are there for a very long time, and a lot of growth happens in that amount of time, which is one reason why they're so important.
I would actually like to address, it's starting to sound as if we are closing a school, and I want to say that that's not what's happened yet. What we are trying to do is argue both sides of each question and point out the negative and the positive. So if you hear us saying what would be good about something, it doesn't mean we're going down that path. We're just trying to hear both sides of the question.
Actually, and just one more sentence on that. The questions were all asked from the standpoint of how would things be different if, right? So everybody here knows, everybody in the audience pretty much knows exactly what is now, right? And we know what we value, what we love, and what are some concerns. These questions try to pursue some avenues about how things might be different if something changed.
Okay, we're going to do a couple more questions, and we're going to have a 15-minute break from 7:30 to 7:45, so we can stretch our legs and get a drink of water and whatever else we need to do.
Kathy, what do we have where?
There will be cookies and lemonade in the first science room.
So Kathy says there's cookies and lemonade for everybody. The first science room up the stairs outside. So thank you, Kathy. Number 7, what would the impact be, particularly if our 2 smaller schools are combined, in the amount of library and computer support the students receive? So, anybody want to go with that? I know we talked about the importance of having the librarians back.
When my kids were in school, in elementary school, the elementary schools were about as large as we're talking about if we combine the elementary schools. And there was more library support. I don't know if computers were invented back then, but there was quite a lot more support. A lot of other things were different then too. There was more funding. There were a lot more students in the district. There were a lot of different factors. To the extent that there's cost savings from consolidating schools. The question is, what would we do with those cost savings, if any? And if there are any, would that go to increasing teacher salaries, or would it go to having more staff for libraries and computer support? And so I think that's that's a secondary question, determined by what the primary answer is.
I think though, when Andy, when you did the analysis, you took all staff, on-campus staff, and moved them with the students.
That's largely correct, but so if you have, actually, this is one of the attachments, and also it was in the back for members of the public. There were some staffing that we looked at. There could be an opportunity for reduction. And so obviously the one that's been discussed in some of the 7-11 meetings was administrative support, potential reduction in principal. What I did for the larger school sites was I felt if there was that significant increase in student population at one of the remaining 2 large school sites, then we really wouldn't be able to realize an opportunity for savings on things like library, media tech. If a school like Summit were closed and there was 40 students who would be going to theoretically San Antonio or potentially dispersed across the district, the actual increased need for library, media tech at that receiving school would be minimal. And so as as I say in my very first bullet point here of the actual chart itself, that this is an upward limit of potential savings that I believe is a reliable number. And so for Summit and San Antonio, it does actually assume that the school closure would result in an elimination of those hours. So we have that listed though here. So if you want to know, I am wanting to know what it would look like for the library media tech to increase at the remaining school sites. You have the number right there to know what that would, what reduction in savings that would net. So when it comes to instructional staff, so the actual teachers and instructional assistants, there was no changes that were assumed in this. But where we saw potential for changes would be in some of the other classified support. And that would be the noon duty and crossing guard. Again, at some of the school sites, an increase in the student population may not necessitate an increase in noon duty supervision or crossing guard. Nutrition services, and custodial and library media tech. Those were the positions I felt that there was that potential for either savings or the need to maintain that staffing level, or the increase in hours plus benefits at the receiving site would offset the savings.
Thank you, Andy. That's really helpful.
Actually, I just for the benefit of folks that don't have this in front of them. So what we're referring to is one of the handouts, the 2015-16 elementary school consolidation savings. And there are columns for each school indicating, as Andy said, what he thinks is sort of the top savings that he would expect would be visited if we were to close each of the respective schools. And the numbers are for Miners Oaks, 168,784, 168,784 for Miramani. Same for Topa.
Kevin,
Nope, you're reading the wrong
sorry to
one.
interrupt, but if you actually, that's
those total personnel costs. Sorry
right,
about that.
Total potential annual savings.
Yeah, sorry about that. 154,659 for Miners Oaks, 74,655, right? 226. Potential net savings.
If it's okay, I'll jump in and I'll explain where we had the change.
That's why we're paying him those big bucks.
So the document, again, this is available to all in the audience in the back table. This chart is largely the same document that 7-11 reviewed back in the spring. Based on feedback from Thane and Mike during a prior board meeting, a request that we add some information here, and I fully support the recommendation to add some of the financial information. I think it's a fair criticism that we've heard from both 7-11 and from the public of looking at that upward number, which was discussed thoroughly in the past, that 225,000 or so would be the potential upward limit of savings at the large elementaries, 190,000 at San Antonio and 106,000 at Summit. Those were the numbers that were discussed back with 7-11. What was added for this document was trying to in some way account for a potential lost revenue of students who may not continue with the district if the school was closed. as Thane, you said, and as we've talked about in the past, when it comes to the accuracy of these type of projections, it's very challenging. The only thing I can say with certainty is this is wrong. But I think it's better than what we had before. And what we did was we estimated that 1/3 of the inter-district, again, students coming from outside of the district, who attend that school site, if it were closed, we projected that 1/3 of those inter-district transfers may not stay with the district. And so that's why you now see a new column under the total potential savings, annual savings. There's a new column that's potential lost revenue, and that tries to account in some way for the reality that we may lose students if a school closure occurred. And so that brings us to a new number that hasn't been seen before, which is the potential net savings, and that tries to net out the expenditure savings and then that lost revenue. And then the one other change made to this document is the next row below that, which is the Measure J savings, having that information on the same document.
Andy, is there anywhere on here where, I notice custodial, but is there maintenance staff?
So I did not include in this projection a reduction in maintenance staff as a result. What I thought is we have a department that still is significantly reduced relative to where it once was. We know we have a workload that has been discussed extensively both during Measure J, during the Measure J campaign and since then, that this would be an opportunity for efficiencies, for a reduction in workload or for a reallocation of workload of the current staff. But I did not include in this projection a reduction in the staffing level of our grounds or maintenance staff.
So
however,
is that question on any of these?
I'm sorry?
So there isn't a question that says basically how would consolidating schools affect the maintenance department and other departments that are trying to service multiple.
That's correct. That's not one of the questions, and that's a fair point. I've listed the positions that I felt were most likely available to have adjustments based on a reduction in the overall number of schools. Certainly is a discussion that could be had as to whether or not we should look at all positions. I do feel that, especially when it comes to grounds and maintenance, that is an area where we, again, have that need. And so we are not listing it as a savings, and we also are not accounting for it as a positive of having a small workforce now having one less site potentially to have to support. So it's not included on either side of that conversation. But just so you know, though, the area in the operating expenses where we have other operating, that's the last row prior to the sum total of that section, that does try to account for actually the repairs that, the common repairs that are being done when we have to send a plumber out to take care of a bathroom, or if our own staff are having to purchase a new, wall hanging unit, that we do try to account for that, because that would be a realized savings. But the actual staffing associated with maintenance and grounds, I did not include in this.
And so that potential net savings that I had started to read, I think I already covered Miners Oaks, is 154,000. I'm just going to give you I'm going to round it. 154,000 for Miners Oaks, 74,000 for Miramani, 138,000 for Topa, 166,000 for San Antonio, and 66,000 for Summit. And that, again, is net of the pretty realistic expectation that you're going to lose some students who come from out of the district to a school if that school's been closed. And as Andy said, it's a third, you're assuming, right, for purposes of this?
That's correct. So, and I can maybe imagine a comment that a San Antonio parent or staff member may have as to it being under projected for San Antonio. I agree that's a possibility. What we did was we looked at trying to do something fair that was equitable across the sites. What we chose, as you said, Kevin, was 1/3 of the inter-district transfers. However, again, we've heard in the public comment of prior meetings that a number of families in the San Antonio community have stated that while they may not be inter-districts currently, that they have the ability or desire to potentially leave the district themselves if there was a school closure. And so it's possible that the potential lost revenue for San Antonio is understated by the way, the method that was used to try to estimate some number.
I think we'll take our break now. We'll take a 15-minute break before we start another question. So we'll come back at 20 minutes to 8. Okay. We do have another speaker. Annika wants to speak again, so please do.
You know, as I was listening to this kind of opining about I think this and I think that, and I was listening to so many comments about how much we all love our schools, and it brought me back to a comment I made at the 7-Eleven committee, and I don't have my prepared speech here, but the essence of it was about privilege. And as I listened to your discussion, you know, the only thing I heard were a bunch of privileged people talking about all the other preferences that all the other privileged people have in this town. And it's lovely that we have that privilege. It's lovely that so many people are so attached to their schools that they choose and they drive across town to go to because they have the privilege to not be working 3 jobs or 2 jobs, and they have the privilege of owning a car that they can drive there and back with. But I just feel like, you know, I would like to hear the voice of who we're going to stand up for. It's lovely to build a picture of our bucolic valley that we can read about in all our faraway magazines that try and get tourists to come here, about how hipster and cool and all of those features that make our valley so lovely. But I want to hear where the buck stops in terms of protecting the needs of the most vulnerable and the most underprivileged. And I'm kind of, you can see I'm a little bothered, but you know, trying to create a scene that's going to make everybody happy so that they can have their picture perfect school experience is to me secondary. What are we going to guarantee the least privileged? And if you look at our LCAP and if you look at our real challenges, you know, you talked about how will this affect kids' education, and everybody said, oh, well, all our schools are doing a great job educating all our students. But in fact, there is a very significant achievement gap in our school, and it falls along those ethnic lines and poverty lines and, you know, all of those unduplicated count things that you refer to. And I didn't hear anybody talking about who we're going to protect in this vision of creating a new configuration, and that's kind of bugging me. We want to keep all the people happy that want to come here because they have a nice preference. We want to permit them to have their preferences, but I'm feeling like there's something missing. And back to Miners Oaks, because to me that's where we have the highest unduplicated count. That's where we have, what, 60-70% of our kids are families earning less than something like $30,000 a year. You know, they're on the free lunch program. Those people, those moms cannot get to another school when their kid gets reassigned to another school. Those moms can't go pick them up in the middle of the day when they have a fever and need to get picked up. Those grandmas who don't even drive, much less have a car, can't go to some other school where there is no public transit. So there's hardship. When you're talking about closing Miners Oaks School, you will be introducing hardship. When you talk about closing any of the other schools, you're upsetting somebody's nice picture of their bucolic situation in our lovely Ojai Valley. But when you close Miners Oaks School, you're introducing hardship. And that's what I just hope that you will not forget in all of this dialogue. And I would like to hear some lines in the sand drawn about what you are going to stand up for to ensure and how you're going to create that. So that's just what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Hey, Annika, can I respond while you're still up there?
Yes.
So I think that's a very unfair criticism in all candor. And for you to say that if we closed Miners Oaks, that would impose hardship, but everybody at TOPA is doing great, isn't that a cliche and a stereotype? I mean, you recognize there are poor people at TOPA too, right?
Yeah, but not to the same extent.
So the point is, I mean, we're up here trying to have a, as Hank refers to, as a conversation that will lead to decisions that maintain integrity. And that's certainly what I'm trying to do. And what you're bringing up, I think, is a good point, which is that one of the aspects of this is to think about poor people and how they would be affected by the close of a school. But beyond that, to accuse us up here of merely talking about privilege and hipsterism and all that, that doesn't speak to me
That's
whatsoever.
what I was hearing. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I don't. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Any other comments? Can I go back to my chair? Thank you.
Actually, I mean, you can go back, but I do have one comment on that, and I totally agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying about the hardships that it would put on families to go. But, you know, I think one of the considerations, one of my primary considerations from the very beginning was about improving education. And I think that because there are so many combo classes and because the teachers are stretched in all the schools, we're not giving kids as much ESL support as we could if we had fewer combo classes and if we had more classes in a single school. So from an educational perspective, I think that those students that are having the hardest time would most benefit from a consolidation. Whether or not we decide to do that or not, I think there are a lot of other considerations. But to say we're not thinking about that, I think is totally wrong, because that's honestly where I came from at the very beginning. How can we best help these kids who are struggling and maybe even get them to college? And so, yeah, I mean, I totally appreciate the points, and I want to hear all of the input that you have, because that's fantastic. But yeah, I think the name calling is unfair.
I didn't mean to call any names.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Sorry. If I did that, that was not intended. I just feel like there wasn't conversation about the most underprivileged people in our district, and I want to hear more talk about that.
I think it's a little premature right now.
Okay.
I don't think anybody up here is going to champion any particular school at this point, and I don't think that you're going to see lines drawn in the sand right now. This is kind of like sausage making. There's a lot of conversation about a lot of things, and I think that's our job. And I'm sure the decisions will come when the decisions come. But I do reflect that I saw a chart that talked about if intra-district transfers were restricted and folks could only go to their neighborhood school, the number of minority students at Minor Oak would drop precipitously, which suggests to me that there are a number of folks who travel to Miners Oaks, poor or not, because that's a welcoming and presumably welcoming and comfortable environment. So I think it's even maybe a little bit of a jump in terms of a supposition to assume that everybody at Miners Oaks is there because it is their neighborhood. I think, in fact, the numbers belie that. Nevertheless, I think that, you know, our decision is hopefully to benefit as many people as possible, including schools other than Miners Oaks, which we represent as well. So I think it's, I understand your sensitivities, but I think they're premature.
I think I would like to just tie into something that you said, which is looking at our performance numbers. We always seem to compare them to the state and compare them to the county. And I think, Thane, when I first got on the board, you and I sort of had a conversation about our desire to really jumpstart improving all our schools. You know, to really, I don't like accepting that 46% or whatever the number is are at or above their grade level. I don't like those numbers, and I meet fabulous families and fabulous teachers. Don't understand why we can't get beyond that number or above that number. So I appreciate actually hearing somebody refocusing us on some of those issues, not just, you know, the cars and the buses or the this and that, but the academics and what is happening at each school and how important that is in this discussion.
I'm sorry, but I put a speaker paper on Kathy's chair, but I don't I sure wish I could stand here and say that, you know, I just heard that the federal government and the state government have decided to fully fund schools, you know, to the absolute need, but I can't. I want to ask your patience because I probably don't even need this. I'm asking your patience because I have a worry and I want to share my worry with you.
Can you state your name for the audience?
I'm sorry, I'm Martha Lapine. I teach at Miners Oaks School. I teach kindergarten. I have 5 TKs. So not all the TKs are in that standalone program. I have 5 of them. I actually have 6. We just got one.
We also have 8, 9, 10, I think depends on the day at San Antonio or at San Antonio.
Oh, that's right. I had forgotten about IC, yes.
That's right.
So my worry is, and I think it's relevant to the next question, are there examples of other school districts which have closed elementary schools and what issues arose? When I've read about school closures, local ones are just as painful as what we're experiencing. I mean, I'm sure we've read about the local ones in Thousand Oaks and Simi Valley. Nationwide, and here's where my worry is, nationwide, when I've read about school closures, most of the schools that end up being closed are the schools in a district that have the highest number of lowest socioeconomic families. So the schools that I've read about in most of the school closures that have happened across the nation end up being the schools that do have the highest percentage of lowest socioeconomic families. I think, did I say that correctly? That made sense. So, you know, when you read about research and about at-risk students, you know that, you know, change is harder for them. I mean, change is harder for everything, but they're not as resilient in terms of their ability to accept change and transitions. You want to keep everything sort of really consistent for them. So I was wondering if it would be appropriate to add to the agenda maybe for next meeting, because I do agree that it's premature. I mean, we're talking about really general things, but because of this number 8, and I've read, you know, there's a lot of research about you know, segregation across the nation, which has been increasing from what I've read in school districts, and there's a lot of research about, you know, trying to integrate socioeconomic families in a school and how it benefits all students to do that integration, and about how one of the really ideal methods that have been espoused, I think Susie brought it up, is trying to bring in families of higher socioeconomic status to schools that have higher percentages of low socioeconomic families. So that I was wondering if it would be appropriate to ask if that could be on the agenda for next meeting, where we could maybe talk about what research shows happens to students, at-risk students, when their schools are closed, because that has happened. So there has to be research and data. I would even volunteer to bring some. Would that be appropriate to ask to have that?
It's best if we get the information before the meeting, because then we have a chance to read it and digest it and, you know, ask questions, formulate our questions about it. So that'd be awesome. That'd be fabulous.
Could I just bring links, web links? Could I
Sure.
email them?
That would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Dr. Banks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're moving on to number 8. Oops, another one. Okay.
Sorry.
This is good. I think this is what it's supposed to be.
I asked, I didn't want to speak out of turn. I spoke to Andy and during the break, so I just
This
I
is
wanted
Susie
to clarify.
again.
Susie Taylor, Miners Oaks, parent of 2 children. A couple of things that I heard, and I think, Madam President, your comment regarding the magnet schools and not having any funding for that. Just wanted to clarify that the brochure that Ms. Braggett passed out, that's a brochure that we collaboratively put together about our school, and those are all things that we're already doing. So simply giving us a title helps with what the courts have designated as the school district's responsibility to address segregation. In fact, their case law is all about putting the emphasis on the very people who, kind of like you screwed it up, you need to fix it. And one of our problems is this open school policy, and focusing on the school of choice as a legal responsibility is absolutely there and it's absolutely alive. But that is a problem when our schools become ethnically imbalanced. And I think Director Ruff made a comment about, or maybe it was Mr. Shanahan, about our schools being balanced. If you look at the schools of boundaries, and if everyone were to go back, because they didn't have school of choice, all 5 of our schools would be by boundary ethnically balanced. Now that hasn't happened because everybody has shifted around, but what we can do with no cost to the district is allow the parents at those lower functioning schools to market their school. It's not a cost issue. It's a way to voluntarily move the students to bring, just as Martha Lapine was speaking about, to bring the socioeconomic balance back to those lower performing schools. And that's what we're asking for support on it. And it's really not even at the board level, it's at the local administration level, because there's no cost to that. And everything in that brochure is already happening at Miners Oaks. I just don't believe the community or the 400 parents that are transferring around the valley are aware. I think they perhaps do it because their girlfriend chose that school, or it's the hip thing to do. They want to be at the school where the clique is. I don't think a lot of their decisions are necessarily based on actual knowledge. And I think if they looked at the class sizes or the services that are being offered at those schools, they may have a different, they may be enlightened. And the other thing that I want to talk about combo classes is that, and it's in our brochure, Miners Oaks is second with the least amount of combo classes in the entire district. Topa has the highest number. San Antonio, Summit, they're all combo classes. I think Marimani is the only school that doesn't have any combo classes, but we're right there behind them. And so just because you're a large school doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have less combo classes. In fact, it's the exact opposite from what I understand, and I think that's significant.
Susie, can I ask? My wife is the joke. As the joke suggested, my wife's very involved in the PTA.
Yes.
At Topa now, and now we have a son at Nordhoff, so also at Nordhoff and a little bit at Matilla while he was there. But how is and by the way, I'm not as it stands, hopefully you can tell I'm not an advocate of closing a school. So I'm asking, Annika sort of suggested of it too, what is the parent engagement like at Miners Oaks?
Well, Annika actually spearheaded quite a huge change for us. It helped us recognize that we have a big problem. We had a huge outreach deficiency. I've been at the school, I have a third grader now, so this is my third year going in. My kindergarten year, I really didn't participate because there wasn't a lot of, I didn't feel welcomed into the PTA. It was very cliquey. And not to say that they did a bad job, it's just I wasn't at part of that social clique. So I went to one meeting and I never went back. And obviously I'm a very involved parent. I wanted to be involved, but I just didn't feel welcomed. So I know exactly how a lot of our English learners feel because I never went back and I had no hang-ups. I spoke the language, I had no barriers, I just didn't feel welcomed. Now, we just received some funding. We have our headsets. We have a vice president of advocacy as well as myself as the vice president of membership. So our focus is reaching out to those members who, like myself, didn't feel welcomed. They simply didn't participate because they couldn't understand what we were talking about. So now we have interpretive headsets so we can have these interactive meetings so that everybody can bring their skills to their parents, just like all of us. They just don't understand what's going on because they don't speak the same language that primarily dominates the school. And it's been an eye-opening experience, and it's been a really positive one. And I think Andy and Hank would probably be honest and speak that we kind of failed those Spanish speakers in a lot of ways. And they weren't speaking up, but we've corrected it, and we're moving forward. But it's on the tail of the school consolidation and school closure issue. So we're feeling at a significant disadvantage because we're just getting started. Gina and I this is our first year as president and vice president, and we're walking into a school closure consolidation. We're not even able to focus on our fundraisers and our fall festival because we're spending like she said, we canceled our meeting today because we had to scramble to get this brochure done because we felt it was so important to give you folks something to demonstrate what we're doing as a PTA, as just parents of this wonderful school. And I was surprised to not see David White in the audience because
he
didn't see him. Oh, he left. Because he's a community member Lori Hammer, same thing. They're coming to our school and helping us with outreach, and it's just something that I hadn't ever been a part of, and it's been a really amazing experience.
Thanks.
But I would also add, what parent engagement like at Myers House is what you might expect in an environment where 70% of families are living in poverty, which is the parents don't come to many school events because they're probably working 2 jobs.
And I just, one other thing, we talked about transportation, and I think somebody mentioned about if the school closure were to occur, and let's just use Miners Oaks as an example, we wouldn't put up razor wire, but we would still maintain the property, which I'm guessing would be done with the Measure J fundings to a certain degree. I just think, and I shared with Andy during the comments, I think it would be really traumatic for a I just use my girls, for example. We walk to school, and to walk to the school that you no longer attend because it's been closed, to get on a bus and be transported to your new school, I don't really think that that would be ideal for our children. I think that would be really traumatic for them. And I think that that's really not an option, to be honest. And I think we really need to not ignore that those figures. I was telling Andy over the break, my girls are in 1st and 3rd, and they surveyed 2nd and 5th. Okay, so our numbers are actually, I believe, much higher than what's demonstrated in the survey. Certainly it's a good indication of where we're at, but a lot of those people walk because they have no other resources. And I think that having to get on a bus and spend an hour trying to get to school, I don't think that that's the best education we can give our children. I think the best education is to give them neighborhood schools that they can walk to and be part of the community. I think that that is what makes Miners Oaks unique. It's not just the students, it's the community.
Thank you. So I guess the number 8 here, we'll move on to question number 8. Are there examples of other school districts which have closed elementary schools, and what issues arose? Did enrollment change? What issues were resolved, and what things should we worry about? So, Andy, do you have information about Simi Valley?
Yeah, just real quickly. So the material that the board had was accurate and complete as of the weekend. Okay, but Andy's been able to track down a good source at Simi Valley so he can explain to you what he learned from them.
Sure. So Simi Valley in the past few years has gone through a very similar process with declining enrollment, obviously not to the extent to which we've experienced it, but assembled a 7-11 committee and ultimately recommended the closure of 4 of their elementary schools. The board then actually rescinded that decision and then revisited the topic, ultimately settled on a closure of 3 of their elementary schools. What they ended up doing was the 4th one, the one that was taken off the list, became the receiving site of one of the 3 that were closed. Still digesting from the hour-long call I had today with my counterpart down there. So I may have some additional information next week, but a few key takeaways I had from that meeting were, 1, they felt it was really important in their decision-making process to make sure they did have a defined purpose for those campuses, and so 1 has actually just been used as storage because it's structurally unsafe for any other use. And then the other 2 are, 1 became the sole site of an independent study program that was previously housed on their site of their alternative high school. And then the last campus became a early childhood center where they were able to partner with local community groups, First 5, the YMCA, and a couple others to have a preschool run through the site, as well as many other offerings for early childhood education. The one interesting, result that we're still digesting, Smarter Balanced results that just came out this past week, but he did share that of one of the lower performing schools that was closed, obviously not closed for that reason, there was a number of other factors that led to the identification of those 3 schools, that those students who actually went to a single school site as a whole ended up having the highest increase in their test scores this past year relative to their last year at the prior site. So not to say that would be in any way translating over to our district, but I did think that was an interesting piece for Simi Valley. That was where they saw the largest academic increase in academic performance.
Well, so so to me, this is one of the most important questions, and I said before that I thought that to make any decision without really having a very good sense of what the outcome would be would not be smart. Along with the Simi Valley experience, we earlier today received information about 2 school districts for which closing a school ended up being a disaster. So, and in those 2 districts, one of the things that happened was they ended up with a charter school. And as many of you know, citizens can start a charter school. And especially when a school closes, that's often something that happens. And also, I believe the school district is first and foremost obligated to provide its facility that's no longer used as one of its district schools to a charter school. I think they're in first position. I'm not sure about that, but something along those lines, right? They have a high priority.
Correct.
And of course, then the income that you would hope to save, or the expenses you'd hope to save, now you've lost ADA, you've lost students, so now you have a revenue hit. So we had 2 anecdotal discussions provided to us from 2 different districts that were along those lines. Like, one said, we closed the school, we ended up with a charter school and years of litigation. Be careful. And the other one said something in a similar vein. I also did some research recently about a Sacramento City school district that had closed a number of schools. They got a charter school, and they got some other unintended consequences, including losing 400 interdistrict transfer students. 400, that's $4 million. So this is a very important issue to me. Obviously, we're kind of right now working with anecdotes, so I'd love to bring this into more relief with more hard information. Certainly, I'd like, Simi Valley is a big school district. I'd love to see, I know one of the districts, I think, where we got the description of a bad result, a bad unintended consequence scenario, I think is a similar sized district. So this to me is hugely important because I feel like, I mean, this is like, scientific, scientific thinking. I mean, you do an experiment, you get a result. You see how other experiments in a similar vein went. You ask yourself, will I get a similar result? And if I'm completely convinced I'm not going to get a similar result, I better have some really good objective reasons for being sure of that. Because I've said this before, but I think the Hippocratic Oath, particularly in an issue like a school district like ours, is vital. Hippocratic Oath being do no harm first. First, do no harm.
I think it's hard to listen to the stories about the other schools and sort of know, well, what did they do? What was their size? Which one did they close? Why did they go through? What did they go through? And does it have any relevance for us? So I think it is an important issue to think about the consequences, but I don't know that comparing or finding out from other districts is as, it's sort of like, did they use the same ingredients in the experiment? If you don't know what they used and they had an explosion, then how can you know not to use that ingredient or not? So, I don't know.
I agree with Jane. I think certainly we don't know what approach their 7-Eleven committee took. I mean, ours was so incredibly thorough and excellent in their examination of every aspect. We don't know the discussions that the school board held. We don't know the recommendations that they had for the uses of those schools. So I do know that Ventura Unified has closed several schools, 2 of them in Oakview actually, and then they created their Sunset Elementary School, and that seemed to work well for them. So it does, it can be a positive outcome if it's carefully planned, I think. But that doesn't mean that that's something, I'm not saying that's something we should do, I'm just saying that is a possibility. Let's move on to number 9. Provide examples of how the transition would occur, student life on the larger campus, number of children walking to school. So, who would like to start with that? Is that something we need to?
I have to say that I have the same problem with that. If
we
you're
should
not
postpone.
telling me who we're talking about,
Yeah,
it's
I think that's something that's a topic for a later discussion.
I think we've also covered a lot of the topics in the survey and other things. So.
Yeah.
I will add, though, that this is something that I've been very interested in. I feel like one of the problems of being in the position I'm in on a school board is that the information and the decision making sort of almost by necessity ends up being kind of superficial. And even a discussion like this where people in the community are saying, oh my God, will you stop talking about it? It's still at a kind of distance where we talk, I guess this goes to Annika's point to some degree, hopefully without the hipster part. We talk abstractly about these things, like as if it's something that we can really put into a box, where the truth of the matter is, I've been very interested, like specifically, like let's talk about what happens when 2 of our schools or 3 of our schools become much bigger. Let's talk about, can we know, what happens with the traffic? What happens with the actual student experience? That's what we do here. We provide students with student experiences in education. So while it may be difficult to talk about, it seems to me it's kind of along with the question of what will happen if we close a school and will it be a disaster. These are kind of core questions. I don't know. I know at one point, Hank and Andy, you talked about giving us sort of more detail about how you felt like, some of the aspects of the student experience would work, like, for example, meals at the different schools, stuff like that.
Well, I can expand a little bit on what I said both at the 7-Eleven committee and then at a board meeting just real briefly recently. I've spoken with the principal of each of the 3 largest schools and asked the question, and Dawn's here and Teresa's here, it's one of the smaller school principals, but with a conversation I had with Dawn and Catherine and Cheryl, I said, if your school became 200 or 300 students larger in the case of Miners Oaks, or 200 students larger in Miramati, or 100 students larger at Topa Topa, how would your campus accommodate that in terms of recess, in terms of lunch, in terms of transportation, all the things that, Kevin, you asked about actually before the summer. And I would just tell you, without providing a detailed report from each one said, we could accommodate those larger numbers well. Now, it might mean another lunch period. It might mean a little different recess environment. It certainly would mean, based on the survey that Andy did, and we just sort of knew this intuitively, there would be more cars coming to the campus. Depending on the campus, how many more? We've learned a little bit today about the percentage who drive. But I think it would be incorrect to feel that those campuses that had over 600 students at one point with the same number of classrooms could not accommodate somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 550 students. I think they could, and more important, the principals think they can. So I can't give you the absolute details of how it would all work, but they're confident that it would work.
I think Hank's point is well taken, is that our principals are very experienced in how things operate at their various schools, and they would make sure that student life would be good, and successful for the greatest number of students, that the children who can walk to school will, and that the transition would be a good one. I'm not saying that this is something I'm advocating. I'm just saying that I trust that our principals and the teachers would work very hard to make sure that any kind of transition like that would be successful. So some students will feel a little bit lost at the beginning, but as it's kind of like going to a new school. When you've moved to a new community, you figure out how you're going to fit in, and then you do fit in. And I think it works out, because kids generally want to be happy, they want to have friends, and they want to enjoy school.
Do you feel, Kevin, that it's, think of it in terms of, to simplify it very much, a family says, oh, we should get a different internet provider. And you could talk about that, but until someone says, which one are you going to choose? We're going to look at AT&T, we're going to compare it to Verizon, we're going to compare, right? Until you start comparing them and what would happen, we would lose NFL package if we left Dish or whatever, you don't have anything to compare. So I'm kind of feeling, that's where I'm feeling my distance is out here. What would our district look like with 4 schools, with 3 schools, we know what it looks like with 5 schools. And so if we just say, what does it look like with 4 schools? My question is, well, it looks different if you close Summit than it's gonna look if you close Topa Topa. So to talk about a 4-school model without saying which school, it's very time consuming. I think the 7-Eleven committee did that. I think the packets that I've been reading since last October have shown me that it's very different if we close Miners Oaks than if we close San Antonio, if we close Summit. So until we start circling around what those 4, there were some suggestions from the 7-Eleven committee to make it 3 elementaries. Do we need to hear whether anyone here thinks we should look at 3? And if not, we wipe that off the model. I mean, Hank I agree on taking Topa Topa off that model. It just doesn't seem viable, but maybe among the 5 of us, we also agree that there's another school that we don't see as being a good. Are we still too far off from that? Is that a next week thing? Is that a decision that we are feeling like would be helpful?
I personally feel that that's a next week decision. That it's better to continue to discuss the questions that we've all asked that that are supplied to us on the agenda, and finish that discussion out, and then we can decide your question. Should we take another school off of the possibility, or do we think that we should go? Do we think we should go to 2 schools, or should we go to 3 schools? I think that's a next week decision. I'm not saying that we decide on the school, but perhaps get more precise next week.
Does everybody else agree, or
I've talked a lot more than you have. Sorry. I think there's, maybe I shouldn't talk. What I'd like to say about the topic is I completely agree. I think a lot of these questions we could really dig our teeth into these questions if we knew kind of the parameters around which we're doing. On the other hand, whether we feel like we should have 3 schools or 4 schools or 5 schools, discussing all of these questions, I think, is critical, because there's been talk as long as I've lived in Ojai. I'm a newcomer. I've only been here about 20 years or so. But there's always been talk about, should we get rid of this school, or should we get rid of that school, or what should be done? And I think that it's really important that at some point in time, like now, we really talk about all these issues. So that we, as a board, as a community, we have the opportunity to really air this stuff out and see what makes sense for everybody. I've spent the last 18 months or so getting data, analyzing the data, hearing from everyone, and not everyone, well, it could be everybody in the community at this point. But there's been a lot of discussion about it. I still want to discuss all of the questions, but we're all getting tired, so maybe I'll add some excitement. I have convinced myself that I think we ought to have 5 elementary schools. And so I do want to discuss the issues so that but I understand also that looking at the same data, smart, reasonable people could come to a completely different conclusion. But I think we really need to talk about all of the issues. Like Linda says, we should go over the questions. But, and as I have throughout the night, I argue against my conclusion, right? Because, because there really are both sides on almost every one of these issues that we need to consider. So if that's helpful at all, I don't know.
Too many. Okay, well, in terms of the question about children walking to school, you know, we've got a little bit of data, right? So we know that there are a couple of schools where most of the students do not walk to school, and that we know that there are some where a large percentage of students walk to school. So, I mean, just in general terms, if you close a school, and I'm not saying yes or no, but if you close a school where the majority of students do not walk to school, then presumably they're either going to drive someplace else or walk to a closer school. If you take away school choice, you're going to have kids walking to school probably more than not. I'm not comfortable with the conversation right now about removing school choice. I think it's a long tradition, and I don't know that that's necessarily the solution to some of the problems that have been presented to us. So, you know, I think that is, in terms of general values and how I would make my decision, I would prefer that kids have that option. That is, I think, despite saying that, you know, how people get to school is secondary, I think it's secondary to the education that they get in the school. It's not to say that it's not important. So I like that concept, and I would tend to lean towards solutions that would enhance students' abilities to bike or walk to school. In terms of how the larger school culture would absorb students, according to this question, you know, unless you're talking about, I mean, a huge influx of students, I'm not sure that that's going to be a major factor. I think our instructors are good enough, and I think, you know, if we do blend schools, we have to make an effort to bring the students into that environment and to introduce them and make them welcome. You can't just close a school and throw them all in a building and say, you know, go for it, kids, right? I mean, we'd have to do some sort of transition easement, so to speak. But yeah, without getting more specific, I don't know that we could, other than the priorities of who gets to choose which schools in what order and that kind of thing. But I would prefer solutions that make it easier for kids to walk to school, and that's about all I can say at this point.
I'm hoping that we can conclude our discussion somewhere close to 8:30. I know. Oh, Salvador. Sure, come to the microphone, please.
I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but maybe something that might be beneficial is to kind of, for you 5 board members to kind of look at what ideally with the budget that this district has and the resources that we have, what kind of what would the best district that we can possibly offer our kids look like in an ideal world with the budget that we have, and kind of start that as the framework, and then kind of work our way back and say, okay, if this is what ideally we would love to strive to be as a district, now let's kind of see what steps we need to do to get there. It might be a consolidation of schools, it might be other things, but I think once we know what that end is, and that's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning, is kind of having that strategic thought of what we want to get to and having an end in mind, and then everything will tend to fall a little bit easier because we know in what direction we're going. It seems to me like right now there's not too much clarity on the direction. We just know that something needs to be done because in a year or two, we're not going to have enough money to sustain what we have right now. And so we got to figure that out. So I think that, again, this is a great opportunity for us to really kind of think ahead. Where do we ultimately want this district to look like? And then, okay, now let's kind of backtrack and let's take the steps to get us to that. That's just a suggestion on my part.
I would actually like to address that because I think something in my mind in the last, half an hour has just been, I feel like there is kind of if not a disconnect, there certainly is not a consensus as to what is driving the conversation on this subject. Some of us, like I personally, believe this conversation has been driven by financial issues. that for me, this conversation doesn't make any sense unless the conversation is about district resources and finances and what we will save and whether the savings are worth closing an elementary school. So, because if you're talking abstractly about, well, maybe we'll close a school because it seems like it might be a good idea, it might, offer more collaboration, it might reduce the number of combo classes. I mean, from my perspective, the blood and treasure required to close a school is just not a conversation that makes much sense to me. So it does feel to me like we should get on the same page. I mean, look, I've said this many times to people in the community. If we keep losing students, there will come a time when there is no question we'll have to close schools. But the question for me is, are we asking ourselves, are we at that time now? Or if we're not at that time now, as Salvador says, is it important to decide to do something now because of what may come in a year or 2 years? I'm not prejudging what the answers are, but those are, again, from me, I've heard different people have said different things. I don't know who decides why we're here. From me, the question has always been financial. If the financial benefits are not there, for me, it is certainly not worth closing a school. So I don't know if that's worth trying to get a consensus on, but I do think it is a question that sort of is central to what we're doing.
Obviously, we do need to decide partly based on finances and also based on enrollment, because if at a certain point, a school gets too small that it's, for it to be successful. We know that we're losing students hand over fist, and that's a sad reality of being in Ojai. I think that I feel these are questions that the board asked staff to research for us. So it seems like we need to be discussing these things because there's so many different facets about closing a school. It's not just financial, it's everything else too. And how are the parents going to feel? All those kinds of things. And so I feel we really need to finish our discussion about these. We can talk about the finances also. Those are not going to be forgotten. I want to assure you, and certainly we've gotten, we've got reams of material. For those in the audience, this is the 7-Eleven committee reports right here. So you can see we killed many trees to get that all out. And so we're doing our best to try to look at everything so that, because some people don't think that, there may be people in the audience or in our community that don't think financial issues are that important. We want to assure them that we're trying to cover every aspect. So, Marianne, you had where'd she go? Okay, Marianne wants to make a comment.
This might be my last meeting that I can attend. I might be out of town, so I just wanted to follow up on what Kevin was saying, and it's reiterating what you already know. But in terms of the money, the moment that the light bulb went up in my head, which is, what are we talking about? Why are we here? Because we all lived through the crisis in 2008. If there were any time that we were going to take drastic action, it would be then. Now we're we've got some challenges, but we're on a far better footing than we were. So when we had the facts in front of us, it was very clear that we were talking about closing a larger school was not going to add up to even 1% of our school district budget. That's a fact that came from Andy. And from the Delinka report, we were not looking at a precipitous drop through 2025 in our enrollment. So yes, we have had a drop, but going forward, we're not. And then when I was reviewing the notes today, I was struck by what Andy had written in terms of separating the Measure J from our school closure issue. It had been an important part, but then there was an issue that came up, which is that when we were talking about reconfiguring, we were actually talking about keeping some of the buildings, but using them in a different manner, which would mean still putting the Measure J funds into those buildings. So just to follow up on the finances, to me, it was crystal clear in that moment that there was not a financial driver for this discussion. And I did appreciate some of the educational drivers. And then just because this might be my last chance to talk with you before you make your decision, in terms of Summit School, where my children have gone, they don't attend there anymore. I just have to repeat something that you've heard from me before, which is that Summit School has a tremendous opportunity to bring in even far more revenue to Ohio Unified than it already has. The figures that I have calculated very carefully is that it's brought in $730,000 conservatively to the school district from 2011 to 2016, solely in District of Choice students. There are a lot of things that are happening in Santa Paula with a brand new development on a high road, not far away from Summit School. The school district closing down its intra-district policy in Santa Paula, causing some concern, and also the increase of population with a brand new development on the east area one side. So all of those are long-term possibilities for Summit to really be an increasing revenue generator for Ohio Unified. I know that's not in the context of your conversation, I apologize, but this truly might be my last opportunity, and I thank you again.
Mary Ann, I'm going to argue with you on that one. I've been looking at the numbers for 3 years. I keep hearing about these opportunities for Santa Paula and Summit, and all I've been seeing, if you look at the K through 4, is a huge drop in the Santa Paula students who are coming, and I think the development in Santa Paula is going to cause a greater crisis. The students aren't going to come here. And I know when we dropped from 3 teachers to 2, you felt like that was a very impactful decision, but we actually had less students the year before from Santa Paula when we had 3 students than we did the year when there was 2 teachers. So I hear the potential, but I actually asked Andy this morning, are we on or yesterday, are we on necessary small schools this year, or are we on LCFF funding for Summit? And we are on NSS, but we are only earning $7,000 this year. Last year, it was $12,000. And if we look a year and 2 years ahead, when the large class of 5th graders promotes from Summit, we would go back to LCFF. We wouldn't be earning anything from the NSS monies, because the NSS numbers are great when you're at 53 to 62, but we haven't had those numbers at Summit for years.
I'm not going to go over ancient history, but in I think the 2012 and 13, or 2011 and 12, we had 78 students. Again, I'm not going to go back over history. We don't have enough time this evening, but I'm speaking from deep experience and deep knowledge of the potential that there is at Summit, and I can see where you would get those questions. And without going into the ancient history, which I'm happy to talk with you about, I think that you're underestimating what we've already seen demonstrated at Summit, which is $730,000 in revenue, which you can't ignore. So I like I said, it's not the time right now, but I'm happy to go about to talk about it with you more, just because I don't think we have, in this context, time to go into all the details. But I would love to talk with you about it some more. Okay. And just say I think we have room to talk. Thank you.
In lieu of the fact that it's getting late and everyone is working and is busy, we've gotten through half of our questions. So I'm proposing that for next week we finish with our questions, and if there's any additional questions that you have for staff, you can give those to Hank, and then, or if any community members have any questions for us to discuss, you can give those to Hank. So I think the agenda for next week would be basically getting closer to the idea of, perhaps will we close a school? If we decide that as a board, that we are not going to close any schools, we can take a vote and that will be the end of it. We won't be meeting any longer. We won't be needing to meet. So, but if we still need to have additional discussions, we've scheduled meetings for every Wednesday this entire month of September. So we will continue to meet and discuss until we make up our minds and arrive at a consensus.
Sure. I would too.
Before we go on, I appreciate the lateness of the hour and all of that, but I don't want to lose the trend here about why we're here as opposed to some of these questions. And I think for myself, and I speak only for me, obviously, for myself, the whole concept of consolidation, closure, et cetera, it started as a financial concern. It started as a way to assure that we were most effectively using our bond money in the most responsible, most productive way possible. Now, having said that, is not to ignore the fact that there are a lot of other things that play into the equation, not the least of which is the emotional and neighborhood attachment people feel for their schools and the disruption that would occur if there was closure or consolidation. And so for me, I forget who said this, it was Steve, who said, and it's a decision of necessity. Because given my druthers, I would do nothing. I would leave everything the way it is and just work harder at making things better. But there is a limited pool of money, and I think for myself, I want to be sure that if I say no closure, that there is a reason for that. And if I say a closure, that there is sufficient benefit on the finance side to outweigh a lot of the negatives. I mean, I didn't come into this thinking I want to close schools to get rid of combo classes or any of that kind of thing. For me, it was primarily initiated as a financial due diligence question. So I have no great agenda to see a school close. What I will be looking at is what is the benefit of that, and is it sufficient and sufficiently long-term to warrant a lot of the disruption and the change that people will go through. So I just wanted to tack that on. It is still predominantly for me a financial decision. If the financial benefit isn't sufficient, none of the other stuff is really hitting me as a necessity. So that's kind of where I am at this point.
I had a conflict come up for next week, so I'm concerned about not being able to participate, but I did want to just express my view on a couple of these things that have come up. If I can be here, I will be here, but if I can't be here, I wanted to be part of this discussion. Two reasons. The finances is one. Finances are critical for our district. We've got a lot of financial issues to deal with. When the 7-Eleven committee reviewed the savings, and as Andy has enhanced the analysis, I think it's great analysis. As Andy mentioned, these are probably maximum savings numbers. I personally don't think we would realize all of these savings. I think that we would have to spend some more money at the schools if we consolidated for additional staff and additional resources. And for me, at this point, I don't know that the finances justify it for me. But the other really important reason, and for me, more than finances, it was the educational aspects. I feel really strongly about the combo classes. I feel strongly about the support and having more classes available for students to choose from. I think those are really important things, but having weighed all the options, the question for me then becomes, is it more important for a student to be able to choose one of a few classes at a particular school, or is it more important for students and parents to be able to choose different educational environments that offer unique possibilities? And I was thinking just this week, while we might save $100,000 or $200,000 by combining, in order to recreate what we already have, the resources we already have, would cost tens of millions of dollars to have all of these schools with all of the different environments. And we have that. It's a great resource. And I feel really uncomfortable about giving that up at this point. So I just wanted to put in my opinions there.
I know you wanted to end, but I'm going to push it a little. Because I look at these. because many of the, you know, there's 4 or 5 in here that aren't even discussion items. They're things we asked for that we received. We've already sort of said we're not going to be looking at the 6th grade configuration at this time, so that takes off 2 of the questions. Again, I understand for Michael and Kevin the financial aspect. For me, it is more than that. It is an important thing, obviously, financially, but it's not. I'm with you, Thane, that the education aspect of it is very important to me. So but balanced with finances, my understanding, I thought we were going to be doing this meeting, then a budget meeting, then another meeting. That's not correct. So next week is just.
That was open.
I wanted to talk about that as well.
We haven't finalized it. We can discuss, we certainly should discuss it tonight. What are we going to do for our next meeting? But I think we need to answer the questions that we want to answer.
Okay, because I'm going to kind of jump out there on this one and say my frustration level is, well, it only saves a little bit. Well, this only changes a little bit. And it's sort of like, that's how we just keep coasting and we don't improve. And I want to see, I mean, I felt like in the spring there was this great rise of, you know, yes, let's get involved. Let's make our schools better. Let's do something. Our teachers are great. Let's, you know, find ways to promote. And then now it's just kind of drifting off again. And I just feel like, you know, even the 6th grade, it was so exciting to sit in on those committees, and then we couldn't afford it, so then, like, it just kind of drifted away. What about those ideas? Why didn't we implement some of those ideas that don't cost money or don't need the 6th grade on that campus to promote them? So I'm feeling like the same thing here. I just feel like, okay, $222,000 isn't really, it's a 1% of our budget, so we're just going to keep things the same. Well, the same is getting us 46% on testing, and I hate testing, and I could care less about testing, but you know, are our kids graduating and going on to college? Are our kids being successful? Are they entering Matilaha prepared for Common Core? Common Core has changed a lot of things, and that for me is an impetus for maybe more teachers working together. I mean, I'd love to see our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers preparing 1 or 2 lessons on social studies and language arts, and having another teacher, or maybe 2 teachers are teaching 4th grade and 5th grade, because one of them is teaching math only. I mean, we need to do something to shake up our schools and make them more productive. This might not be it, but I'm afraid if we just say, oh, this might be too hard, or oh, the numbers are too small, that we're not getting to the root of what we all as a community want, which is some new spark in our schools. And I think we are, as a valley, perfectly capable of doing that. And again, like that, this might not be the answer, consolidation might not be an answer, but I don't want to have it get lost in comparing it to numbers that aren't small enough. You've got to take a step to start on this road of improvement, and I think we all are excited about that.
Well, Jane, you know, I'd like to respond to that. I mean, so you talk about engagement, and I agree, engagement is great. 6th grade potential changing of 6th grades in our district, tens of, if not 100 or more people showing up for a meeting, engagement. Talking about closing Miners Oaks and ending up with hundreds of people in Chaparral Auditorium, that's engagement. But I don't think we should conflate saving money with change because we have bad test scores, or change because things aren't as ideal in our district as they could be. I mean, to me, I agree with most of what you said other than the solution. It doesn't seem to me that saving $150,000 could possibly be worth the, as I said, you know, incredible disruption caused in the lives of families and students in our district. We've already heard, we've seen Miners Oaks, 50% of those people walk to school. A lot of people there have very little financial resources. So what? We're gonna try and fix things and just do stuff and let's close a school if maybe that'll shake things up. I mean, to me, I agree. I think I'm really interested in looking at our budget. I'm really interested in looking at how we spend money in our district and asking ourselves if there are new ways we can spend our money, if there are more resourceful ways we can spend our money. I've made a pledge to the teachers because I really do want to give the teachers more money, but I don't think the solution is going to be closing a school. And I will say it again, it is incredibly important that the board understand what the, chess, if this were a game of chess, everyone knows chess is about your move and then the next move after that, the one you don't control. So we have to have a really good sense of what's going to happen after we close a school if we're going to close a school. And what I saw today from Andy, before we heard about the Simi Valley apparently good experience, was a couple of horrible experiences. And if we made a decision now in light of all the things you're talking about with the district essentially being vulnerable, I'll add to that. I've never heard more people in the district talking badly about our school system. I've never heard so many people even saying, people in the district, I will never send my kids to Nordhoff. So yeah, we have I think it's something.
I don't understand. I don't understand. Yeah.
People in the district saying I would never send my kids to Nordhoff.
I've never heard negative.
I've never heard so many negative things about our district.
As now?
As now.
I'm not going to argue with you, except the facts don't bear that out.
Well, again,
the
but
facts just don't bear that out.
That's fine. But
okay,
just to
so
finish to finish my point. Pardon? But I agree. Maybe we are at a crisis moment, but I don't agree that the solution would be to close a school if the crisis has been brought on by, whatever the problem is. We have to ask ourselves, what is the specific solution? And closing a school is incredibly traumatic for 300 kids. So we better have a good reason if that's what we decide to do.
We haven't decided, and that's why we're having a continued discussion.
But to add, I'd like the agenda to include a discussion of the financial resources and the budget in the near term while we're talking about this.
I think the budget is a lot more complicated. Seems to me like that's an entire meeting discussion about the budget.
So,
I mean, it's not
point of
something-
clarification. I can start talking numbers now and go until next week. So I agree. It's going to be a longer. It's depending on what it is that you desire. We will have a conversation on the budget next week because we're required by state to have our unaudited actuals go to you guys by September 15th. So our meeting on the 14th will have our best look at the close of books for 15-16. So we can review that, and I can add any supplementary information on this past year. But some of the topics I've heard in the past as far as the goal of the meeting or the meetings would really be vision setting or looking at budgeting going forward. And I would be worried a little bit with having that housed within a single meeting. But I did want to make sure that everyone knew that we will talk budget next week because we need to have it on the agenda.
But that's a very limited scope. Right. Okay, it's a legal thing to do. Kevin and I have great conversations, mostly on the phone or in this particular case. I'm not going to try to suggest to you that I talk to as many people as you might who have students in 6th, 7th, 8th grade who are saying, well, I'm not going to send my kid to Nordhoff. I'm just telling you, and you know this because I've shared this with the board very forthrightly, that the number of students coming out of Matilaha who have gone to Villanova in the last 2 or 3 years, which is the only real outsource that we have, unless they just leave the valley to go to school, is 1/3 to 1/4 the number of kids who went 3 to 5 years ago. So I don't feel, I've just never heard until now, that there is a diminishing demand for kids to go to Nordhoff. And if that's true or not true, I don't think it has anything to do with closing an elementary school. Okay, and so, God bless all of you, Andy and others, many of you here. I would love to read about and learn about how the performance of students in 2017 and thereafter exceeds by a significant percentage, however you define it, however you measure it, that which preceded 2017. I truly mean that, because that's all I care about for the kids here. But I will tell you that given the resources that have been available to our staff, the fact that they have even maintained the stature that they have within the county, and the state, compared with other districts who are at the norm and we're way below it, I think it's a huge testimony to the people who've worked here over the last 5 to 10 years that they've been able to do that. Okay, so all for the future, be better, better and higher, but right now we're still, as various people have said, doing our best with resources that are significantly below the mean. So if you maintain where you are with resources below the mean, I think that's a pretty darn good result. So that's just what I have to say about both Nordhoff and general performance in the district.
So I would like to end the meeting on a positive note, but I hope that, and thank you for that. We do need to deal with the agenda. I think I would like to see the rest of our questions answered in a discussion. We'll look at the interim report and discuss that with Andy. And I would hope that if you have any financial questions for Andy, that you would send them to him.
Okay, so here's what I'd like to do, because I don't want to have the conversation about the budget dismissed as it relates to your ability to make a decision. Okay, that's not fair. I know. I mean, you wanted to have, in your original questions, you wanted to have the discussion on the budget after we made the decision, right? You wanted to have it before. I guess what would be very helpful to me, and I think Andy was saying the same thing, is let's say in concert with the report on the 2015-16 school year, I would like to know specifically what it is that we could provide for you that would help you make the decision on the elementary schools issue. Financially. Okay, what about the budget is it that would help you do that? For example, and I think, Kevin, I don't want to interpret too much from what you said, but let me see if I'm sort of on target here. That whether it's 150,000 or 200 or 250, let's call it 150 for now, because that sort of looks where it nets out on the high end. I think what you're saying, and it's a really good question, where could we find, for example, $150,000 in the budget that would offset any savings that we might have in closing a school? I think it's a heck of a question. I hope we've asked it pretty much every year, okay? But I think your questions for Andy and me about certain components of the budget, whether it's 16-17 or 15-16, would help us understand what we can provide for you that will give you a better sense of the relationship between finances other than closing a school and finances relating to closing a school. Okay, you understand what I'm saying? I don't want you to make a decision on closing a school where several of you have said tonight that finances were a driver, initial driver. Michael, you said that. Kevin, you may have been very eloquent about that. Jane had some other thoughts, okay, about where finances are in the whole scheme of things. I just want to be sure that we're providing you with the best possible information so that, if you say, well, I really do think there's $150,000 in that budget that is being poorly spent, not spent as well as it could, I want to be sure that we've answered that question. I do.
The other question that for me would be helpful, and you almost got there, I thought that's where you were headed, is that, so I look at this savings chart, which, thank you, and see that close 2 schools, 2 small schools, 1 big school, whatever, you're still talking $150,000, $200,000 in freed up revenue. So I really need an understanding of how significant that is. I have a feeling, but I'd rather get past a feeling, right?
So you want to know how that money could potentially be used?
Well,
the savings,
there's a lot of
the
ways
money
it could be
that's
used.
saved.
It could be used as salary, it could be used as a bunch of things, but my first blush, it doesn't sound like very much money. It doesn't sound like it's going to move the needle.
That's a
lot
very
anywhere.
straightforward question that, and like Andy said, he and I could talk for a long time, but you certainly know that we have equated that $150,000 or so with about 1% in compensation for all staff, okay? It's not the only way it could be used, right? You could hire X number of hours of additional personnel, but that's a very straightforward question that we can answer as it relates to the savings chart, okay? But I think what Kevin was talking about a couple of meetings ago was having a broader conversation about the budget, right?
Yeah, and so just to be clear, what I have requested and what I would like to do is have a community working session. I've seen different school districts call them different things, but an open-ended discussion of how we spend our money in our district. Of course, it would include some details, but where, I remember the words stick out to me. I believe, Thane, you used the term sacred cows. Do you remember that? We were talking about what things we could do. Oh,
I don't remember that, but if you're going to a good place, I'll take credit.
Apparently he was a tall blonde-haired man, and apparently his name is Merv.
I want to know where you're headed before I decide.
Yeah, it's the most outrageous thing I ever heard. Thank you for. But this conversation that we're having up here, albeit not that many people in the audience, is not in a vacuum. I mean, it's a big conversation in our community, and the thing that I get asked more often than anything else is, how can we simultaneously have less kids and bigger classrooms? What's going on? How can we not be paying our teachers, commensurate with similar with teachers in Ventura, but we still are big classes, limited resources, et cetera. And so as a board member, having been here for 2 years, I have to tell you, I don't feel like I've really had an impact or been able to really penetrate this hugely important question of are there different things we can do in our district? I mean, like Jane brings up, we're just, my sense is it's just is as it always has been, as it always will be. And if we need some money, we might close a school or fire a teacher. So I wonder if there are different things we can do. Maybe the answer is no. I don't have any, I have a lot of confidence in our leadership. So, probably the answer is no. But I feel like it's a conversation that's so tied to this elementary school conversation personally. But you've heard, because for me, it must be financial if we were to close a school.
Can I get back to the agenda?
Let's get back to the agenda. Sure, come on up.
And I have a comment as well before we move on to the clarification question.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Moore. I have one question. In all of these conversations, and personally for me, the last 30 minutes have probably been the most important. I've only heard about one projected budget being used to justify closing schools. So I'm unclear. I would think if you're going to look at data, you're going to look at least 5 years of prior and at least 2 to 5 projected. Does that exist?
Yes.
Have you looked at it?
That's what was used to compile the numbers. So we didn't just simply use 15, 16, utility bills, for instance, as the only source. We were looking at a trend over a 4-year span.
So is that something that the public has access to?
Sure. Absolutely, they're on their website.
Okay, then my bad, because I really thought this was being based on just one set of numbers. Okay, great, that's it, thank you.
Susie, you had another comment?
I just have a clarification question. I was concerned about Director Whipple's unavailability. I mean, you're one of 5 and valued member of this board, and it's really concerning that that President Taylor would speak of a vote potentially next week in your absence. That's very concerning to me, and I'd like some clarification on that process. And before I sit down, I just wanted to say to Director Wells that the 15-16 test results did come out, and I just wanted to let you know, if you haven't read them yet, you might want to review them, that Miners Oaks had the highest gain in growth, and I wanted to make sure that that was pointed out. But I'm concerned about a possible absent member if we're going to be having a vote.
I didn't know about the absence until he mentioned it. So certainly if he can't come, we would reschedule a meeting or not have a vote. I mean, we wouldn't vote on something when he's not here, just to let you know.
And I did want to let you know my feelings so that we, have a consensus ahead of time on that as well.
So back to the agenda.
Yeah, so here's my question. I was hoping next week to look at Hank's Let me find that green sheet. Thank you.
Green sheet.
That list of options after we finish the questions and talk about the budget.
Yes.
To sort of get a general roll call on how people felt about each one.
Yes.
And then for me, that would bring up other questions because I have an open mind. So I want to hear, if I say yes to one of these and Kevin says no, I want to hear why does he say no? Because I might agree with him and go, okay, I hadn't thought of that. But if I don't know how you guys feel, so it's hard for me to sort of take steps in any direction.
Well, we're having this conversation so that we can arrive at our decision thoughtfully. So I think that certainly after we discuss the rest of the questions, we can sort of take a general straw poll and see what people are thinking, in addition to the budget.
To help you with the timing too, remember when we set up the meetings, we specifically had that fourth Wednesday, okay? So you have, next week could be some combination of, we know we have the formal work on the 15-16 actuals, we've got to do that to send to the state. More conversation about the questions that are yet outstanding. Some conversation about the budget, and I think it's just up to Andy and me to present to you the best way to respond to what we're hearing tonight so that you have a conversation about what you want to talk about with the budget and also fold that into the ultimate decision, all right, on the schools. All right, so let's call that September 14th. And Thane almost certainly can't be here, right? You don't have to vote on September 14th.
We're not taking a final vote.
Exactly. So the vote on the tentative position of the board absolutely can be September 21st, right? You set the agenda for September 21st next week, and depending on where you are, and you have the conversation you just talked about, Jane, which I think is spot on, then you can set the day, the September 21st, for a vote to determine what your tentative position is. Okay? Then you would have the option of either having a public hearing, if a public hearing is necessary, the next Wednesday, the 28th, or keep that 2-week span in between your vote and the public hearing, which was sort of the concept.
It was required?
No. It was just, we put it there so that there would be more time for people to know what your position was. Okay, and then if they wanted to come to the public hearing, they'd be more informed about what it was. So you could still have the public hearing on October 5th. And even if you need another public hearing, you could have it on the 12th. And then you could still make the decision on October 17th. So I would say, I appreciate what Susie said, and I think we all agree, this is too important to not have 5 people weighing in, even though we know where Thane is tonight, right?
And I really apologize for next week, but it was unavoidable. And I've been, I don't think I've missed a meeting for a couple years now, so.
I miss.
I just want to be clear. So my request for a meeting on the budget is being denied.
No, not at all, not at all. But the way you defined it, Kevin, we would have to publicize that it's an open public discussion on the budget, right? If we do that for next Wednesday, I'm not quite sure how we do it to meet the standard that I think you're setting.
Right, but I just want to be clear. This was something that I raised and we discussed as we are now discussing. It was not.
Absolutely.
I'm not turning it into something it wasn't before. So
you did. Absolutely, you did.
Okay.
You did. No question. And we'll, like I told you, and you know this anyway, we'll do whatever the sentiment and will of the board is.
Right. I just
Okay,
I recognize I'm one person. I just want to
whatever you
want to. I think I made my point. I just want to find out if there's a resolution, if we're going to talk about it, or is that something we can do before we make the final vote on this? Is there interest in that? If not, I'm one person.
So is it okay if I just jump in? So if we do go that direction, as Hank said, we absolutely will do whatever is your will. I would appreciate a little more guidance because I think that very quickly this could turn into something other than at least, Kevin, what you're requesting, which is an opportunity to really look at some of those. Let's go back to the sacred cow term. We've talked about our personnel cost, for instance, is around 85, 86%. I could see us spending easily 4 hours on actually breaking down position controls, the individual FTE of staffing and the certificate and classified service by school site, and where people say, does it really make sense that we have that level of custodial service at a school site if we're talking about school closure? So the personnel piece by itself could be a really significant one. But then separate from that, if we want to look at non-personnel, again, to go to the level of detail of if we're going to look at curriculum expenses, if we're saying that we don't believe we're updating textbooks too frequently, that's one of the struggles, that we shouldn't be updating our textbooks so often. It would take some real depth to be able to know that answer. Or if we felt we were spending too much on, again, X, Y, or Z, the depth that would be required, I'd be fearful couldn't be accomplished in that meeting. But if you help me, give me direction, or anyone else who, if that's the course we go, then again, I'll provide whatever's requested, and we can have that conversation.
I'm a little concerned.
So I can make a suggestion, because I think what I'll suggest is that in between now and our next meeting, which will not be on that subject, I'll interact with you and see if we can bring some more clarity to it. And then at the end of the next meeting, I can address it again with some more ideas about exactly what I'm proposing.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I like the idea of taking a strategic pass at the budget, because I think, we've talked a lot about do things differently, and it's easy to say blah, 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 but then you got to get in and do the work. I also appreciate Jane's concern about, again, doing it differently in terms of delivering the educational services. What I get concerned about is that, my understanding is that we were here to make a preliminary decision preparatory to spending Prop 30, the bond money. Measure J, I'm wrong place again. Measure J money. And so I kind of don't want to get away from that. I know that I absolutely agree that we need to be more mindful about how we spend our money and where we put it. And we need to make changes. We've talked about marketing our schools. We've talked about a lot of other types of things. I just get worried that that's going to be a very long conversation, and I think we need to make some progress in terms of the bond. So it feels like we're trying to jam a whole bunch into the bond conversation.
And it's diluting our discussion about the schools.
Or distracting from getting to a closure on getting to a place where we can start spending the bond money. So that would be my only concern.
I think we have a good idea of what our agenda will be. Okay. Any other suggestions? So I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank everyone for coming. You all are fabulous.